Hello everyone, Sainter here with the Guild Wars 1 skill review project, and today I'm going to be talking about common skills. So common skills is the category, at least this is how the wiki categorizes things, of skills that don't have any specific connection to a profession. In other words, any profession can make use of these skills. Now, the vast majority of these skills, which you're going to see, like here's, all of these profession skills, and then we come down here. Most of them are going to be PvE-only skills associated with one of, I guess technically 6 different factions. There's the Asuran title track skills, the Deldrimor title track skills, the Ebon Vanguard title track skills, the Lightbringer title track skills, the Norn title track skills, and technically there's a Sunspear title track skill as well for us to talk about. There will also be a no attribute skill that is allowable in PvP as well, Resurrection Signet, and then I'm going to talk about Signet of Capture at the end. But these title track skills, rather than scaling with attributes, scale instead with titles. So titles are things that you get for accomplishing stuff in the game. They all are kind of got in different ways. So for example, Protector of Tyria, right here. This title I got for completing the missions in Guild Wars Prophecies, both the mission itself as well as the bonus objective. But most of these title tracks, such as Sunspear, right here, Sunspear Castellan, this is the Sunspear title track. You get it by generally killing enemies, doing quests, things like that, that award you Sunspear promotion points. So you get enough points, you get another level. Daring Delver is the Deldrimor title track. Underground Agent is the Ebon Vanguard title track. Now, a lot of these cap out their effectiveness at like rank 5. So, for example, this will go up to Underground Agent. I can get this title all the way up to rank 10, but the effectiveness stops increasing with rank 5. So rank 5 is the highest you need to get them. That means that my Norn title track, Slayer of Giants, and my Asuran title track, Not Too Boring, are both going to be a little bit under the maximum values that they could be at. They simply stated can be higher. They could be up at rank 5, and this character doesn't have them there yet. Mighty Lightbringer, this is the Lightbringer title track. There's a couple skills with that. I believe this one also caps at 5, but I'm not certain. But that's the title tracks that the PvE-only skills we're going to talk about today scale with, rather than with attributes. Now, technically, when I've talked about professions, the Sunspear title track skill, because there's one for each profession, scales with the Sunspear title track, and the Friend of the Kurzix or Friend of the Luxon skills scale with the Friend of the Kurzix and Friend of the Luxon's title tracks. As well. These are all PvE-only skills, and there's a couple of important properties about PvE-only skills. Signet of Capture is also PvE-only skill, but it's very unique. So the rules about PvE-only skills will apply to it, but we'll talk about it much separately and much later at the end of the video. I'm planning on doing all these in one video. So it'll probably be a little bit on the long side, but there are a couple of very important considerations. I accidentally turned my character around. The first really important consideration is that only players can use PvE-only skills. If I bring up the party panel and I add a whim, say Jorah, and I look at her list of skills, she's not going to have access to PvE-only skills. She has all of these no attribute skills. Warrior and Monk have quite a few. You'll see Resurrection Signet pop up here. We will talk about Resurrection Signet later. But you can see that pops up here. But you will see that she does not have access to Signet of Capture, which wouldn't make any sense anyway. Nor does she have access to the Sunspear, Asuran, etc. All of those skills, none of them are available to her. So I can scroll through all of the skills that she has available to her, and it is indeed many, but it is none of those. So that's the first major consideration. Only players can make use of PvE-only skills. The other major consideration is you can only have 3 PvE-only skills on a skill bar at a given time. So, if I add Air of Superiority and Asuran Scan, right there, Whirlwind Attack was removed from my skill bar because I may not equip more than 3 PvE-only skills. So Whirlwind Attack was removed from my skill bar. If I try to add Pain Inverter, it's going to pull off another one, etc. I can only have 3. So this is really important to be aware of. It's a really important limitation about PvE-only skills. So just some notes about those. We will be talking more about some individual... or we'll be talking about all of the individual skills. So I think I've covered all of the sort of important preamble. So again, just remember that PvE-only skills can only be used by players, and they can only have 3 on their bar at a time, maximum. I should mention that several of the title tracks have additional passive effects. So, for example, right now, if I switch over to Sunspear Castellan, Sunspear doesn't have anything. There's a little icon in the upper left corner here that's kind of hidden behind the district indicator that if I go to, say, Daring Delver, it will show up. This is a passive effect. So, for example, the Deldrimor one is Stout-Hearted, which is whenever you use a skill against a destroyer, it takes 15 damage and you gain 15 health. Notably, these will apply to your heroes. So whichever title you have, your hero will get a copy of it. Agent makes you better against Char by giving you more armor, gaining more adrenaline when you hit them, and gaining energy when they die. Slayer of Giants gives you more maximum health in Norn territory. The Asuran one, Edification, gives you more maximum energy in Asuran territory. So these apply in the overworld areas, so not in dungeons, in the zones that are considered Norn or Asuran. And then Lightbringer gives you more damage and damage reduction from Abaddon and his demonic servants, which we will talk about that in more detail when we talk about the Lightbringer skills, because they also care about the same thing. But just note that these title bonuses are not specifically skills per se, but they're skill adjacent, so I thought it was worth bringing them up, and your heroes do get to make use of them. So, anyway, with that out of the way, let's begin talking about these skills. Starting with the Asuran skills, because A is the first letter of the alphabet. Okay, and that's going to start us off with Air of Superiority. So Air of Superiority is 5 energy, 20-second recharge skill. For 28 seconds, you gain a random Asura benefit every time you earn experience from killing an enemy. So this one is... First of all, it is very unpredictable. The benefits, I'd have to look them up again on the wiki. It's not evenly balanced on what those effects are, but they're going to be things like recharging all of your skills, gaining energy, things along those lines. Those are the major ones that I remember. I think there might be a few more. This is quite a powerful skill, particularly if you're killing a lot of enemies. It can give you a lot of energy or recharge your entire skill bar quite often and things like that. You do have to kill or earn experience from killing an enemy. If you are against low-level enemies, they will not give you experience points. There is a certain threshold. I forget if it's 5 levels, 5 or 6 levels, something like that, where when enemies get below that threshold, so enemies will give you decreasing experience the lower level they are relative to you. And once they get below a certain amount, it's just going to be zeroed out. You're not going to get any experience from them. So if I were to take this level 20 character to, say, Ascalon and start beating up, the level 2 to 6 enemies in that area, I'm not going to get any experience points from them, and Air of Superiority will not trigger. So this is specifically designed to help you in areas with higher level enemies, or at least enemies relatively close, or at least at your skill level. I probably underused this skill because, like I said, its effect is very powerful, if rather random. There are certain circumstances where it is clearly quite bad if you're just like fighting a single enemy. But I'm going to give this one a 4, I think. It probably deserves a little bit more than that, but I just don't use it that often, so I'm going to kind of lowball it a little bit relative to what it might be worth, just because I don't tend to use it. That brings us to, like, I generally underutilize a lot of these title track skills, I think. Anyway, that brings us to Asuran Scan. So Asuran Scan is 5 energy, 5-second recharge, hex spell, no activation time. That's really important. This basically activates right away. Same with the Air of Superiority, but that was just a skill, so you kind of expect that there. So for 11 seconds, I think this might get up to 12 with full Asuran title. Your attacks cannot miss target foe, and killing a foe hex with Asuran Scan removes 5% death penalty. So this is a really interesting one. There's a couple of nuances here. First of all, it helps you get rid of death penalty, which can be quite useful. I believe it removes the death penalty from you, or maybe it's for whoever kills the enemy. I'm not entirely sure on that. But the real reason to use this skill is not the death penalty alleviating clause, although that's clearly useful. It's your attacks cannot miss target foe. When it says cannot miss, what it means is that this gets through blind and block and things like that. I don't think it prevents straying or obstruction for ranged projectiles. But if you're going into an area where there's going to be a lot of blind or a lot of blocking, this deals with both of them. Or, you know, there's a bunch of hexes that can cause your attacks to miss as well. Excuse me. So, Asuran Scan is extremely useful. However, it is pretty useless for casters, or not entirely useless. Like, it makes it so that way you lose death penalty, but it's not worth it as an anti-death penalty skill. So this skill is really useful for anyone who's a physical attacker, but I wouldn't bother with it outside of that. That said, it is very powerful for those professions. But because of that, I'm going to give it a 3, I think. Like I said, extremely useful for physical attackers, useless, or not entirely useless, but not worth bringing if you're not a physical attacker. Keep in mind that this applies to your attacks only, not to your party members' attacks as well. That's really important to remember. So I'm gonna give it that 3. Again, it's hard to say if it should be worth more or not, but these are kind of also a little bit based on usage, and I definitely underutilize this skill, I think. So, this is, I'm going to be clear though, one of the more useful PvE-only skills. We'll talk about things like Radiation Field and Smooth Criminal later. Mental Block. Mental Block is 10 energy, 1 second activation time, 15-second recharge enchantment spell. For 10 seconds, you have a 50% chance to block attacks, and this enchantment is reapplied every time an enemy strikes you. So basically, this is like a Guardian type effect. It gives you a 50% chance to block attacks, but when it doesn't block, it renews itself, which means that as long as there are enemies around attacking you, this will probably stay on you because, you know, it's only blocking half of the attacks. This is really useful damage mitigation. It's not, like, perfect. It's all right. Basically, like, Guardian is a really good skill, and this is kind of like a Guardian that stays on you. I don't think this is as good as Critical Defenses is, because that's 75% chance to block, and you can keep that renewed with critical hits on the Assassin pretty easily. But I do think that this is generally useful to basically everyone. Again, I don't tend to use these a whole lot. I think I'm going to give this one a 3 as well. Part of the reasons for this is this, of course, only affects you. So you can't use it to help protect allies. I think that this is most useful in situations where you're going to be focused on a lot. Otherwise, I think if you're in a situation where you're not getting a lot of the attention, this isn't going to stay up very well. So I think that this is a reasonable skill. I don't think it's always the most useful, but if you're in some sort of situation where you're going to be in frontline a lot, or where, for whatever reason, you're getting targeted a lot, this can be very useful. And this is definitely a nice way of adding some damage mitigation. And I like this design. This is a really cool design where it says, hey, if it does the thing that you want, you know, or if it fails to do the thing you want it to do, it sticks around longer. And, like, this is a really cool way of designing this sort of skill as a skill that will hang around and protect you, but also one that won't necessarily linger outside of battle. It's just a really cool, neat design, and I like it a lot from a design standpoint. So Really neat there. And of course, it's an enchantment as well, which means it can be interacted with, which I think is probably good. Mindbender. So this is 5 energy, 1 second activation time, 24 second recharge. Enchantment spell. For 15 seconds, you move 30% faster. I'm not quite sure what that gets to. It might be 33 at max Asuran. And your spells take 20% less time to cast. So this is a weird one. I don't quite know how to evaluate it a little bit. The run speed buff is nice, but there's a lot of other options for it. 20% less time to cast, like making your spells cast in 80% of the normal time is nice, but not major. So for example, it takes a 1 second skill down to 0.8 seconds, which is closer to 3/4. 3/4, of course, being 75. 0.75. The effect, of course, scaling up with like Meteor Shower, I think is a 5 second cast. This would drop down. It feels like this is mostly about the increased movement speed, and it's not quite worth it, in my opinion, for that. There are other options for increased movement speed, such as Windborne speed. It is only 5 energy, which is nice, but my biggest gripe with this one, honestly, is that it doesn't have 100% uptime. It has that 24 second recharge on that 15 second duration. Maybe it's 16 second duration at 5 Asura. But even if that's the case, like an enchanting weapon mod that extends the duration by 20% would extend, the 15 goes up to 18. That's still not, and if it goes up to 16, it's still basically like 18, 19, 20, somewhere around there. So it doesn't get up to 100% uptime, and it's one of those things where I look at it and I'm like, I don't quite feel like this does enough for me to really be interested. Again, I have limited slots that I can spend on PvE-only skills. I have some very powerful profession ones that I've covered in the individual profession videos. So this one feels very weak to me, relatively speaking, for a PvE-only skill. And the fact that it doesn't have 100% uptime is something that I find kind of boggling to me. Maybe it's because of the movement speed. I don't know. I would have to play with it a little bit to see how the lesser cast time actually feels. But as it reads on the surface, this feels kind of underwhelming to me. I'm going to give this one a 2. Just because I feel like there are significantly better options available to me. And this one just feels underwhelming. So, Pain Inverter. Pain Inverter is 10 energy, 1 second cast time, 20 second recharge hex spell. For 9 seconds, every time target foe deals damage, that foe takes 132% of the damage it causes, maximum of 80 damage. So this is extremely powerful against some bosses. But it's also really good against normal enemies. It's just less useful. But this is a very devastating skill. It's a very it's kind of like a weird mesmer monk hybrid type skill, or like Necro kind of plays in that area too. But yeah, so this is an extraordinarily powerful skill. The main thing for me is I don't tend to bring this a lot, and I think part of the reason is getting the Asuran skills is a little bit of a trek, since the vast majority of them. So, with the exception of Mindbender requires you to do because all these PvE only skills, the title track or the race ones, so the Asuran, Deldrimor, which is dwarves, Norn, and Ebon Vanguard, which is technically a faction, but whatever. They're mostly humans. All of these skills are gotten through quests. And so the quests to get these certain skills all come, like, half of them, roughly, come from doing a series of quests in Tarnished Haven or an Asura named Kirsch. Except for Mindbender, which is off of another spot. And then these summon skills right here, we'll talk about them. These all come from doing a minigame called Polymock and getting quite far in it, which is why we're on this character, because I have not done Polymock on most characters. But anyway, Pain Inverter is a skill that I often don't have on some of my characters that haven't done as much, because it is a bit of a pain to get to those quests, that quest location. But the other thing is I mostly play in normal mode, and this skill becomes much more powerful in hard mode, where enemies deal more damage and are more durable, so they're going to be capping this out more often. So higher level PvE areas, Pain Inverter is really good. In lower level ones, I don't think it's quite worth it. I think that because it is 10 energy and has a 20-second recharge. This means it's really good at like wrecking an enemy, but most of the time something like Empathy or Backfire, obviously Backfire is more expensive than this, but something like Empathy or Backfire or Visions of Regret, for example, can be better choices. And there's probably other things that you can be doing. So it's just enemies don't, in most normal mode, just don't live long enough to get full benefit from Pain Inverter. Is kind of what I'm getting at. I'm going to give this guy a 4 because it is an extraordinarily powerful effect. And as a skill, I think it has a really... Like, I'm really surprised that there's no other skills that are this skill. The closest sort of comparison are the Monk enchantments of Retribution and Holy Wrath that reflect damage taken by a specific target. And the fact that there's no profession skill that's like Pain Inverter seems very peculiar to me. So that's just a final note on that. That brings us to Radiation Field. So this is 15 energy, 2-second activation time, 12-second recharge, ward spell. For 5 seconds, foes in the area have -6 health degeneration. When the portal ends, apparently Radiation Field is a portal, foes in the area are diseased for 18 seconds. I don't know what to think about this skill. It doesn't strike me as being very good. 5 seconds of 6 health degeneration is 60 damage, I want to say. Because that's 12 times 5, so yeah, the 60. And then the disease, like 18 seconds of disease is not bad, but I don't think it's 15 energy with 2-second cast time good. This skill just feels a little overpriced on the front end. The 15 energy, 2-second activation time both feel a bit much for what it feels like this skill does. So I don't know why I'd bring this over something like Air of Superiority, or some of the other options we'll see in other attribute lines, like some of the Norn ones are very strong. So I just don't know when I would want this skill. I do think it's got... I think it's reasonable enough. I'm going to give it a 2. But I'm very underwhelmed by it overall, largely because I feel that this is... It doesn't need to have a 2-second activation time and cost 15 energy. I feel those are both too high to make me interested in this skill. Again, as a ward, this is point-blank area of effect, so this is something that feels like it's going to be better on like a frontliner, and they usually don't want to be spending 15 energy and 2 seconds standing around activating this or casting this spell. So it just feels very strange to me, and I'm not quite sure what the thinking was behind it. At least the way it's currently set. Again, a lot of the PvE-only skills tend to be and can be a little bit on the stronger side. So, I don't know. Which brings us to Smooth Criminal. Smooth Criminal is 5 energy, 1-second cast time, 20-second recharge, spell. For 18 seconds, one random spell is disabled for target foe, and Smooth Criminal is replaced by that spell. You gain 9 energy. Okay, so this is a very... I'm going to bring up a hero here. Just don't mind the thing. The Smooth Criminal here is very, aside from being a Michael Jackson's reference, similar to some domination magic skills that we talked about earlier, Arcane Larceny and Arcane Thievery, which become a random spell of an enemy for a while. That's basically what Smooth Criminal is. And my opinion on Smooth Criminal is very similar to those ones. This is sort of pseudo-energy management. It doesn't last as long. 18, probably 20 seconds at max, or at 5+. but it has a 20-second recharge. It costs less upfront energy, 10, 5 instead of 10, but it has 20-second recharge, so when it reverts back, it'll take 20 seconds to recharge, I believe is how that works. This is the sort of effect that is not one that I just casually bring. Basically, this is useful as a little bit of energy management that is like the Pokemon move Disable. It's like, I'm going to pick one of your spells and disable it. The chances that you get something useful that you actually want to cast is relatively low unless you are very intentionally building around it, or if you're doing some sort of Signet of Illusion, Arcane Larceny build. Because I do think that this has a place in the sort of Arcane Larceny, Arcane Thievery, Signet of Illusion build, in that it's useful in that build, or it functions in that build. It gives you another tool in that build. I'm going to go ahead and give this thing a 2, but it's a very suspicious skill to use. Like I said, technically it does allow you to disable an enemy skill and work as energy management, and in that way it's okay, but that's not something that I want to be spending. Basically, I would rather like daze the enemy or something to prevent them from casting any spells than disabling one of their skills for 18 seconds or whatever. Okay, so that brings us to a class of skills, the summon skills. So summon Ice Imp, summon Mersat, summon Naga Shaman, and summon Ruby Djinn. All of these, I'm going to kind of cover them kind of as one. Like, I'll talk about each one individually a little bit, but they're all 10 energy with 3-second cast times, 60-second recharges. They will summon a Asuran construct or something. It's a little ambiguous, but an Ice Imp, a Mersat, a Naga Shaman, or a Ruby Djinn. They're just elementalists. This is a water elementalist, an air elementalist, a what is this one? Earth elementalist, I believe. Yeah, has stoning, and a fire elementalist. Apparently, this one has the best DPS, by the way. But you can only have one of these active at a time, so there's no reason to bring multiples of them. They will make a level 20 with 15 in the respective attributes line for 60 seconds at rank 5. I was looking them up earlier because I wanted to confirm a few things. So a couple of really important notes about these. These do create a creature for you. So that means that they get the benefit from spawning power, which increases the HP by 4% for each rank in spawning power. They also, and I tested this earlier, trigger these skills. Yes, I bought these skills on this warrior to test these because none of my ritualists had these summon skills because they're a pain in the rear end to get because you have to get deep into Polymorph. So, Spirit's Gift, Boon of Creation, and Explosive Growth do get triggered by these summon skills. Interesting little bit of information. They're okay for adding some additional DPS. I do think that, so notes about them, summon Ice Imp summons an Ice Imp that has Ice Spikes. That is an area of effect snare. That can be quite useful. The snare effect is certainly handy. Otherwise, they're just going to wand. They only have the one skill. This is not like a second player or anything. So you are summoning a creature that will follow along, will auto-attack things, and will cast its spell as it recharges. So Ice Spikes is very useful in that regard as a snare. The Mersat, unfortunately, does not have Spectral Agony. If it did, it would be automatically the best one, but all it does is it has Enervating Charge, which is an air magic spell that deals some damage and causes weakness. According to what I was reading in the wiki, because I did some specific research on these skills, it will only cast Enervating Charge on enemies that are not weakened. So this is actually a reasonable way of spreading weakness around, which might be useful. But aside from just being cool because it's a Mersat, not the most exciting one. There are other ways of getting weakness spread around that I like as well. There's the Naga Shaman, which all of these will deal their respective damage on their auto attacks, by the way. So the Ice Imp will wand for cold damage, the Mersat for air damage, the Naga Shaman for earth damage, and the Ruby Djinn for fire damage. That might be relevant for triggering some effects. For example, the auto attacks of this would trigger Mark of Rodgort, which might be relevant. And these would trigger like Spinal Shivers, which might be relevant. Probably not, but might be. Anyway, the Naga Shaman casts Stoning. The thing to note about that is Stoning does knock down weakened enemies, so that could be a consideration when building things. The Ruby Djinn is arguably the strongest because it has Immolate, which sets enemies on fire, and longer burnings, like Immolate's burning will add a lot of damage to its DPS. So that's something to keep in mind. Honestly, to me, all of these skills are like, they're fine. They have various different uses, but to me, they all kind of feel... they're a little bit clunky to use, and honestly, they've generally felt a little bit underwhelming. I think I'm going to give these ones 2s and this one a 3. So, Summon Ice Imp, Summon Mersat, and Summon Naga Shaman I'm giving 2s, because I feel like you specifically want what they're doing, and I'm going to give Summon Ruby Djinn a 3, just because the Summon Ruby Djinn does have the best DPS because of the burning it inflicts. Obviously, it's less good against something like Destroyers. I wouldn't really be inclined to bring these guys against Destroyers anyway, but they are a little bit more interesting in Ritualist just because Ritualist makes them tankier and can potentially use them with Spirit's Gift, Boon of Creation, and Explosive Growth. Just something to keep in mind. Could be particularly notable because of its synergies with Spirit's Gift, which can have the condition removal off of anyone. Probably not the best because you can only use these every 60 seconds, but something that's useful to be aware of. So I feel like if I'm going to bring one of these, I'm probably going to want to go for the Ruby Djinn just because of the DPS it provides. But these, the Ice Imp, the Mersat, and the Naga Shaman can all be considerations if I am wanting their specific effects. So if I'm wanting to spread weakness around, if I'm wanting to snare enemies, or if I'm wanting to potentially knock enemies over with Stoning. All of those then become more attractive. Like I said, these are directly competing against each other since you can only have one of these active at a time. Yeah, so let's go ahead and move on to the last Asuran skill, Technobabble. Technobabble is 10... a great name. It's 10 energy, 1 second activation time, 10 second recharge. Spell. Target foe and all adjacent foes are struck for 38 damage. That's armor ignoring. Probably gets up to 40. If your targeted foe was not a boss, then that foe and all adjacent foes are dazed for 5 seconds. So I'm not sure if it bumps up to 6 or not. But if that target, like you can target an enemy adjacent to a boss and daze a boss through this. This is a pretty strong skill. This is area of effect dazed. That's what this skill should be seen as. So I do think this one's relatively strong because of that, because area of effect daze is just really good. I do find the not a boss clause to be quite interesting. Apparently bosses are not dazed by your Technobabble. They're damaged by it, but not dazed by it. So the recharge is also pretty reasonable on this. It's overcosted for the damage, but not for the dazed. So what I like about the design of this one is this makes you have to be a little bit more situationally aware, because often it's bosses that you do want to daze. So you have to pay attention to where enemies are relative to the boss to be able to get effective dazing happening. And I find that sort of additional little bit of stuff that you have to do to be pretty interesting. I'm going to go ahead and give this one a 4 as well, just for sort of general utility and whatnot. Again, that's maybe relative to the PvE-only skills, and a lot of the time I don't think about the PvE-only skills, or I don't necessarily always have them unlocked, things like that. So usage varies in that regard. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the Deldrimor title track. So these are the dwarf skills, and we're going to start with by Url's Hammer because it's the first one. That's how this works. So this is a weird one. It's 5 energy, 60-second recharge, shout. For 30 seconds, all dead party members in earshot are resurrected with full health and energy. Resurrected party members deal 33% more damage. When this effect ends, affected party members die. This skill does not incur a death penalty. So this is very similar to the monk skill Vengeance. Vengeance, of course, resurrecting an ally for 30 seconds with an enchantment. They get full health and energy, deal more damage, and then die when it ends. This is a very... So this is the sort of skill that can turn around a situation if things are going very sideways. But it's not a resurrection skill. It is a stabilization skill, or it's more of a clinching skill. It's a skill to close things out. I don't like it. Vengeance is okay, but I don't like it either. My big problem with these skills is they're not really resurrection skills. And that means that the situation in which I'm using this, like, this is basically a safety net if things go really sideways and you need to get everybody back up now functional. This is Mass Vengeance. And Mass Vengeance, yeah, 5, like, instant speed Mass Vengeance at 5 energy is not bad by any means, in that the effect can be quite powerful, but it's quite powerful in a situation that's quite bad to be in. And on top of it, if you are... So, like, the ultimate moment to use this is if you're the only one left alive and it resurrects all of your party all of a sudden and allows them to take everything down. That's not a great situation to be in the first place. And the big issue here is often I'm going to want proper resurrection skills, as in skills that resurrect party members and leave them alive. This does not do that, so this is somewhat similar to We Shall Return, and I like We Shall Return generally better. Obviously, this one's a little bit easier to use with a significantly lower energy cost. But I feel like the time to use this is when a couple of your teammates have fallen in battle. But there's still team members alive who have actual resurrection skills that they can use after the fighting is over. So basically my main issue with this skill is I would much rather bring an actual resurrection skill than this one. But I am going to give this one a 2. I don't think it's like useless or anything. I'm going to go ahead and give it a 2. Because the situations where I'm going to use this are very low. I can see that I can certainly concede that there might be people who quite like this skill. And I can see where it can be fairly powerful. It's just I don't want to be in the situation where I'm bringing this and it is being powerful, if that makes sense. I'd rather bring skills. Like, if I'm going to be dedicating a skill to a resurrection effect on my skill bar, I'm going to want that to be a bit more of a permanent effect than what this is. So, Don't Trip is 5 energy, 20-second recharge, shout. For 5 seconds, party members within earshot cannot be knocked down. So I've referenced this one quite a few times when talking about various other skills. It's not an effect that I want often. When it's 5 seconds like this, that's pretty decent. I like this skill most when I'm going to be in an area where there's Giant Stomp happening, because you can pop this before Giant Stomp gets off. It tends to have a very obvious animation for when it's being used, at least by the Beastmasters. Like, there's a big wind up for them, and I think the Thunder Giants and stuff too. So that tends to be a skill where it's really easy to recognize it's happening, or relatively easy. Then Don't Trip is a really nice way to counteract that. It's a lot less exciting outside of that situation. It can also be good in situations where there's going to be a lot of worms, because worms popping out of the ground tend to knock people over. Or if there's other skills that you know are going to be happening that are knockdowns. Basically, this is a counter skill, but it's a skill to counteract wide knockdowns, like AoE knockdowns and stuff like that. Or if you want to try to prevent specific party members from being knocked down. But basically, this is a 2, in that I'm not going to just bring this. I'm going to need to know that there are specifically enemies that are causing knockdowns that I really want to make sure I'm stopping. And it's going to want to be a situation where I know that it's going to be something like Giant Stomp that I'm going to be stopping, or some other area, like maybe I know that there's going to be a lot of Earthquake, lots of casts of like Earthquake / Dragon Stomp, such as against the Jade Brotherhood. And I can predict that this is happening, and I'm for some reason not trying to interrupt it. I'm just trying to stop the knockdown. situations like that, this skill is really useful. But I do want it to be something where I'm getting use out of this for stopping party members from being knocked down because of a Norn skill, I Am Unstoppable, we'll talk about later, which also prevents knockdowns, but on you only, but for longer duration. So I tend to prefer that over this for a lot of situations or a lot of circumstances. But it's a cool skill idea. It's just there's not a ton of times when I want to make use of it. Okay, Alkar's Alchemical Acid. This is 10 energy, 1 second activation time, 10 second recharge. Spell. Throw Alkar's Alchemical Acid at target foe. Target and adjacent foes are struck for 50 armor ignoring damage, and destroyers take an additional 70 damage and have cracked armor for 20 seconds, which is useful because it will affect all destroyers because they all have ludicrous armor. So this is a weird skill. As you can see, this is specifically tuned for fighting destroyers. It does really good damage against them at 120 damage and cracked armor, but against other enemies it only deals 50, which is kind of underwhelming, although it is area of effect. So I feel like I'm going to give this guy a 3. The damage is all right from it. It's almost a sort of a, like, the fact that it's AoE armor ignoring damage on a 10-second recharge is kind of what gets it that 3. Otherwise, it would be a 2, because I wouldn't really want this if I wasn't fighting destroyers for the most part. This is a skill that I can see being okay on like Elementalist or something. Something like that. It is very strong against destroyers, though, because 120 armor ignoring damage and inflicting cracked armor is quite useful on a 10-second recharge. This is one of the things that you're going to see, particularly in Deldrimor. They're going to have anti-destroyer skills, and against the Ebon Vanguard are going to have a number of skills that specifically perform better against Char, because that's typically what they're all about. So there are other options for skills that I like a little bit better for like generic sort of damagey skills, but I mean, this is an option, so I don't know. It is okay. Certainly performs well against destroyers, though. Black Powder Mine. 10 energy, 2 second activation time, 20 second recharge. Trap. When Black Powder Mine is triggered, all nearby foes are struck for 30 damage and become blinded and begin bleeding for 10 seconds. And Black Powder Mine ends after 90 seconds. While activating the skill, you're easily interrupted because it's a trap. This is a weird. It can kind of work on a trap ranger, but like it's one of those skills that like it's a trap, right? It's a trap skill, and it's thematic for the dwarves because they do use explosives quite a bit. They're known for that, dwarven powder kegs and all that business. But it's really hard to make good use of traps in battle. So I don't particularly like this skill much. I don't even like it that much in the trap build because I feel like there are stronger traps for the trap build. I could see maybe using this over Dust Trap, but or whatever that one is, the one that inflicts blind and pulses damage. I could see maybe using this over that one just because it's cheaper, but I'm not too enthused about these. The effect is decent, like 10 seconds of blind and bleed and 30 armor ignoring damage isn't bad, but it just feels a little underwhelming and kind of hard to use. I would like it a little bit better if it didn't have the easily interrupted clause, but even then I still wouldn't be that enthusiastic about it. So I don't think it's quite 1, but it definitely feels like a 2 to me. Because I can't imagine situations like, I don't feel like I would hate using this skill. I just don't think I would want to use this skill, if that makes sense. That brings us to Brawling Headbutt. So Brawling Headbutt is 7 adrenaline, 3/4 second activation time, no recharge is an adrenaline skill though. Skill, you headbutt target touched foe, dealing 70 damage and knocking down that foe if it hits. I don't know why it has if it hits. This is not an attack, so it's not like it misses. It's a very weird line. On that note, this will not refund you an adrenaline because it is not an attack. It is a skill. I do quite like this in some builds. I'm not generally going to use this on anyone that's not a melee attacker, but it's reasonable on a melee attacker, and I especially like it on assassin, because assassins have a number of skills that do want knockdown foes. In particular, they have like technically expunge enchantments, I guess, but specifically what I'm thinking of is falling lotus and falling spider strikes. Those two attacks trigger off of a knockdown enemy. Assassins are good at building up adrenaline because they tend to get a lot of hits in, but they don't have any adrenaline skills natively. So throwing on something like this to allow you to knock down an enemy and extend your combo chain back longer and dealing some good damage in between can be quite useful. This is one of those skills that's kind of like fine on any melee attacker. I'm going to give it a 3 because of that, because I feel like, yeah, this is a fine, useful skill. It can interrupt stuff. Warriors get a longer knockdown because of Stone Fist insignia, or they can. It combos, I think it combos with a touch of Guile as well, which is a Norn skill that I believe has to target, or gets an addition. Yeah, so if it has an additional effect if you target a knockdown foe. So it combos well with that because Touch of Guile, as you can see right here, is an energy skill. So they can kind of work well together. I feel like it's an all-around fine skill, but like not amazing and certainly not very useful on a caster. It's part of the whole rough and tumble bar fighting dwarven theme that they have going on. Then we have Breath of the Great Dwarf. This is 10 energy, quarter-second cast time, 15-second recharge spell. All party members are relieved of burning and are healed for 60 health. This is specifically for fighting destroyers that, this is in particular useful against any of the burning that destroyers inflict, but it is notably useful in the final mission where you fight the Great Destroyer, because it's very easy to get set on fire there because there's a lot of lava, and this will relieve that burning and heal for 60 health. Technically, I guess it's also useful in Hell's Precipice, where there's titans that will put enemies on fire by being near them, or like the Burning Forest in Eye of the North, or notably also the any areas where there's like the imps that use incendiary bombs or things like that. This is not the greatest party heal because it has a bit of a longish recharge. There are other options for healing your party that have quicker recharges in specific professions, and it is also 10 energy, which can be kind of expensive for some characters. But quarter second activation time is extremely quick for a party heal, so this is very fast in that regard. So it is also an option that technically any profession can use as a party heal, even if they don't naturally have access to one that doesn't require them to use, say, a secondary that has access to a party heal, such as Dervish's Mystic Healing, which is admittedly a little spotty, or some of the monk options, like Heal Party or whatever. That said, the long recharge versus the health, is a little unexciting, but I feel like this is an okay skill. I'm going to give it a 3, just because, getting rid of burning is a little bit more of a situational thing, but it's an okay party heal. It's not a stellar party heal. No, it's a fine skill, but if I'm picking PvE-only skills, this is not one that I tend to grab except for when I'm going into that final mission. And Time for Heroes, I think, against the Great Destroyer. So, Drunken Master. This is 5 energy, 60-second recharge stance. For 90 seconds, your movement and attack speeds are increased by 15%. If you are drunk while activating this skill, your movement and attack speeds are increased by 33% instead. So, this is an interesting one. It's okay to use without the drunk effect. I don't like the whole drunk effect, though. I find that those are very awkward to use. It's a theme that we'll see here in a couple of the skills that the dwarves have and the Norn have. Both are kind of known for liking their booze. Norns having their whole ale moot thing, where they like to go drinking and that sort of thing, and the dwarves being known for dwarven ale and aged dwarven ale and all that. So it's an interesting sort of design space to play in. I personally don't like it. The drunk effect is really obnoxious. You can turn it off by turning off post-processing effects, but that turns off other post-processing effects, which maybe you don't want to do. So I have sometimes brought the skill without. Keep in mind, so like it clearly has 100% uptime, and even increasing both movement and attack speeds by 15% can be reasonable, like for almost negligible energy cost. Can be reasonable to do on like a warrior. I've used this skill on this character from time to time, for example. It's clearly significantly better if you're getting the 33% increase, because that's stellar on both counts, and that's very strong. It's just having to be drunk is such an obnoxious clause to need to meet. So the other main caveat with this one is it becomes really questionable to use in areas where there's a lot of stance removal, because yes, it's has 100% uptime, 60-second recharge to 90-second duration, but if you use it and then it gets removed by a wild blow, for example, you're stuck without being able to use it until it finishes recharging, which is a downside in some areas. Notably, a lot of the Char and Ascalon have it's Wild Blow, I think. Wild Strike. I think it's Wild Blow. I think Wild Strike's the assassin skill. But I mean, either one matter. Any stance removal is really good against Drunken Master. So I think I'm going to give this one a 2. It's okay, but kind of, it's one of those skills that's just kind of like almost more filler if you're not getting the drunk effect, and the drunk effect's really obnoxious to work with. So it's okay, but I'm not excited by it. I don't know. That's kind of my thoughts on it, I guess. Dwarven Stability also has the drunk clause. 5 energy, quarter-second activation time, 30-second recharge, enchantment spell. For 30 seconds, your stances last 100% longer. If you activated this skill while drunk, you cannot be knocked down. This is really useful for runners, and because it allows you to have your running stance up 100% of the time, to be clear. And if you're drunk while doing it, not being able to be knocked down is very useful in certain areas. This is also a very strong 2 to me. To be clear, I think it is absolutely perfectly fine and quite worth using if all you're getting is double stance duration. But you have to be using that with a stance who's doubling the duration of that stance is quite useful. So like Gladiator's Defense, I could see running this with, for example, for certain farming scenarios. Like I said, it's useful for running, for extending the duration of something like Dash or Pious Haste, I think. Gets quite absurd with this, because Pious Haste can get like a 6-second, 50% run speed buff. So there are certainly some circumstances where this can be quite useful. Just general casual use, I don't really know when I would necessarily use it. Like, you can, but I really feel like you have to have a stance that you're wanting to get 100% uptime with, that you wouldn't be able to get 100% uptime with without the use of Dwarven Stability, if that makes sense. So I like the design space reasonably well in terms of increasing stance duration like that, which is interesting to me. Okay, Earbite. This is a good old Mike Tyson reference, I think it is. So it's 4 adrenaline, 3/4 second activation time, skill. Target touched foe takes 70 piercing damage. Note 70 piercing damage does care about armor, cares about physical armor, and armor against piercing specifically, and begins bleeding for 25 seconds. This one's okay. The biggest problem I have with this skill is the fact that it does not refund you an adrenaline when you use it. If this skill gave you a strike of adrenaline, or was an attack, like if this was a melee attack, or if it refunded you a strike of adrenaline or something like that, I would like this a lot better. As it is, like the damage is real good, but it's a little awkward to try to fit into a bar that does specifically care about adrenaline, because this takes a strike of adrenaline from everything without refunding it, which is actually a much bigger downside than you would think. I feel like this is one of those skills that's okay, but there's often going to be better options. I feel like this performs best on like an assassin or more of an energy focused like dervish or something. Honestly, most melee attacks or most melee attackers are going to be relying on adrenaline to some degree, which just makes this very difficult to try to slot into a bar well. So there are some circumstances where it does work, to be clear, but I'm not especially fond of this one. I feel like it's kind of 3 territory in that like it's okay. It's a little hard to make good use of. I don't know. I'm gonna give it that 3 and kind of roll with it because I feel like the effect, like the damage relative to it is there. Like I can see being quite happy with using this on an assassin. I just think that I'm gonna want like Brawling Headbutt on an assassin a bit more than Earbite, but Earbite could be perfectly fine on an assassin. I don't know. Maybe it's more of a 2. You know, I've talked myself into a 2. We're gonna recon that into a 2. Just because I feel like most of the time I'm not gonna want this. Not because it's bad per se, but just because it's really hard to work into a build. Great Dwarf Armor. So this is 5 energy, 1 second activation time, 10 second recharge, enchantment spell. For 40 seconds, target ally has plus 24 health, plus 60 maximum health, and an additional 24 armor against destroyers for a total of 48, which will over half the damage that they take from destroyers. This one's interesting. It's fairly long duration, but notably you can cast it on any ally, yourself or any other ally. This is a nice little effect. It gives you additional durability. The armor is more valuable than the health for what that's worth. But, you know, the health is not nothing. This is one of those skills that to me definitely is a 3. Like, it's perfectly fine. It's a perfectly fine skill, but it just kind of gets pushed out by other things. I'm not quite sure why we don't really have a skill that's just like enchanted ally. Like, this basically feels like a skill that could fit right into like monk or ritualist. And actually, conceptually speaking, I would like this sort of skill as ritualist in the fact that it would be interesting to me to differentiate the way ritualists protect allies by giving them armor versus how monks do it through like direct damage reduction or blocking or something like that. That to me would have been an interesting distinction. It was not one that was done, but this kind of harkens into that idea. So I find that to be an interesting conceit. I think this is a fine skill design, but not one that like excites me that much. But the long duration is really nice. But yeah, like I said, it's not. I don't see this as an exciting skill. I see it as an okay skill. So, Great Dwarf Weapon. This is 10 energy, 1 second cast time, 5 second recharge. It is a weapon spell. So keep in mind that traditionally is a ritualist mechanic, but you can only have 1 weapon spell on you at a time. For 20 seconds, target other, emphasis on other, ally's weapon, strikes for plus 20 damage and has a 40% chance to cause knockdowns. So this is an incredibly powerful effect that's extremely awkward to use because you cannot use it on yourself. I don't know why you cannot use this on yourself. You can use Great Dwarf Armor on yourself. If this said target ally's weapon strikes for plus 20 damage and has a 40% chance to cause knockdown, I would love this. But as it is, you do have to cast this on another ally. This means that you, like, keep in mind, this is great on a wander. Like, you can throw this on anyone, and if they're auto-attacking, they're dealing way more damage. Plus 20 is really strong. And, like, every 2 out of 5 hits is knocking down. This is actually an incredibly powerful skill. It's just really kind of awkward to use, and it's really hard to directly tell when it's working because you're not able to use it on yourself. Like, if this effect is on you, you can tell that, oh, yeah, I am getting this benefit, right? I can see the damage that I'm dealing, but you can't see the damage. You can't, like, you can maybe notice the knockdowns, but you notice much more directly when, oh, I've knocked down the target I'm attacking. And so I think I'm going to give this one a 3. I feel like this is the sort of skill that deserves more of a 4, but I'm not giving it 1 because it is target other ally, and that makes it hard for me to kind of feel how strong it is, if that makes sense, which means that I tend to undervalue it. And not bring it. It is also kind of pricey at 10 energy, but the effect is definitely quite powerful, and also worth considering using on a ritualist because spawning power does extend the duration longer. So that's worth consideration. Light of Deldrimor. So this is a very specifically unique skill, as we'll see in a moment. It is 5 energy, 3/4 second activation time, 20-second recharge spell. All foes in the area are struck for 80 holy damage, so this is a pretty big point-blank area of effect skill, with holy damage, which is armor ignoring and doubled against undead, which is useful. The location of hidden objects are briefly indicated on your compass. Any hidden objects in the area are revealed. So this is specifically a utility skill for use in the Eye of the North dungeons, which are going to be the things that have these hidden objects that this is referring to. This is extremely useful for getting you additional loot. As an attack skill or an offensive skill, I enjoy it, although the recharge is kind of lengthy. I prefer this at 10-second recharge for both effects, quite bluntly. But I feel that it's okay at the 80 holy damage. If you're doing a lot of dungeon running, this goes up in value because in a very literal sense, in that it increases the loot that you're able to get in a dungeon considerably. But outside of that, it's merely an okay point-blank area of effect skill. Does good damage, but on a longish recharge. For example, some of the elementalist skills are on like 5 to 10-second recharges, so 20 is kind of long. But it is very cheap in terms of only 5 energy. So I'm kind of uncertain of where to put this. I'm kind of inclined to give it like a 4 just because I like it, and its usefulness in dungeons is quite high, but I don't tend to use it that often. I am going to go ahead and give it that 4, I think, just because this is one that I do tend to use a little bit more often. I enjoy the effect. The effect on it is quite... I like how it looks and all that sort of stuff. Absolutely worth bringing in dungeons. Okay, Low Blow. This is 6 adrenaline, 3/4 second activation time skill. Strike target foe for 70 damage, and if that foe is knocked down, they take an additional 50 damage and suffer from cracked armor for 20 seconds. So this one is interesting. It actually does combo with Brawling... Or it does not combo with Brawling Headbutt, excuse me, because Brawling Headbutt does not refund a Strike of Adrenaline, so you do have to use this with other knockdown skills. I could see using this on like a hammer or something like that. 70 armor ignoring damage for 6 adrenaline is not bad, although being clunky with adrenaline skills in general, because again, it does not refund you that Strike of Adrenaline that all of your skills are reduced by when you use an adrenaline skill, is a little bit awkward for an offensive skill. So I like this one okay. It definitely is worth experimenting around with other knockdown skills, because if it's dealing 120 damage and cracked armor, that seems really good. So this seems like a very powerful follow-up to some of the hammer knockdown skills, or some of the assassin knockdown skills, for example, as well. Or like shock, low blow, I can see being a thing to try. Because I do feel like it's kind of more of a build around, I am inclined to give it more like a 2. I also don't use it very often, so I think that's another reason that I'm going to give it that. I do feel like Brawling Headbutt, of all of these like dwarf brawling type skills, I feel like Brawling Headbutt's the most generally useful one. But this one definitely has power in it, but it's definitely tricky to unlock as well. And like I said, it does not combo with Brawling Headbutt. Brawling Headbutt will reset this down to 5 adrenaline once you use Brawling Headbutt, and will not refund that adrenaline because it does not hit. So it's really important to understand how the adrenaline system works here. And in this case, it is not favorable for that. It does not. That's not a combination. Finally, we have the last Deldrimor skill. Deldrimor has the most for some reason. I don't know why it has 2 more skills than the others, but here it is. Snowstorm. Snowstorm could have been a Norn skill too, but it is 10 energy, 1 second cast time, 10 second recharge spell. Create a snowstorm at target foe's location. For 5 seconds, foes adjacent to that location are struck for 40 cold damage each second. So I tend to like this one quite well. Think of it kind of like a breath of fire that doesn't have overcast, basically, and doesn't require you to spec really high in fire magic to get the 40 damage. 40 damage is a lot on one of these sort of damage over time skills. Now, obviously, armor mitigates this quite a bit. It's not... Even though it deals more damage to destroyers than other elements do, they still have something like 100, 120 armor. I forget exactly what it is. Against cold damage, so they're still going to only take like 20 damage or less from this. So it's not going to hit them as hard as you'd want it to. But against other areas, this is great. This is really good in low-level PvE. If you're, for some reason, doing something there, just because it will increase the damage, obviously, because it's cold damage. But otherwise, like, this is pretty solid damage, so I like this one. I'm going to give this one a 4. I don't think it's actually quite that good. I think it's more of a 3 good, but this tends to be one that I bring more often, so I'm just giving a higher score to reflect that fact. So there's nothing exciting about the design of the skill. I will say that visually, it's like Maelstrom, but amped up, which I kind of wish Maelstrom had a stronger visual effect. Anyway, let's move on to the Ebon Vanguard skills, starting with Deft Strike. The Deft Strike is extremely unique in its type. So it's 5 energy, half second activation time, 8-second recharge, ranged attack. As far as I'm aware, this is the only generic ranged attack in the entire game. It would have been cool to see more of them, but this will work with spears and bows, scepters, and staves. So that's really interesting, that you can use this with any ranged weapon. I wish there had maybe been more generic ranged attacks. I wish perhaps some of the spear skills or some of the bow attacks had somehow been generic ranged attacks, or if they existed in some other form. But this is the only one. And what this does, first of all, it has a fast activation, which can be useful. That's a nice follow-up to things. But anyway, if this attack hits, target foe takes 30 damage, just 30 armor-ignoring damage just straight, which is a decent amount, to be fair. If that foe has cracked armor, then it begins bleeding for 30 seconds, which is very long bleed. Although very conditional, you have to be inflicting cracked armor. Not the biggest hurdle to cross, but certainly present. So I don't like this skill very much. I don't think it's... I think at this sort of level of Ebon Vanguard title, where it's dealing 30 damage, that's okay in higher level areas, if a bit underwhelming. I just find this to be a terminally uninteresting skill. I don't think bleeding is that great of a reward for the enemy having cracked armor. It's not terrible, but I'm just very unimpressed by this skill. I'm going to give it a 2. I don't think it's quite 1 bad, but it's trying. So I'm not a huge fan of this one. We'll get to 1 bad later, I suspect, but yeah, I don't know. That's really all I have to say about this guy. I can see it being okay as kind of like a quick attack follow-up, but I don't know. I just can't imagine it being kind of worth bringing most of the time. Ebon Battle Standard of Courage. Though this is one of 3 battle standards. They're all wards as far as I know. This is 10 energy, 1 second cast time, 20-second recharge, ward spell. You plant an Ebon Battle Standard of Courage at your current location. For 20 seconds, non-spirit allies in the area gain plus 24 armor and an additional plus 24 armor against Char. This makes you real tanky against Char. I'm not terribly excited by this one. I think the effect is okay. There's Ward Against Elements, which is plus 24 armor against elements, and I think Ward Against Harm might be very similar, but it's an elite, obviously. But gives you some life regen. I don't know. I'm not terribly excited by it. I think this is okay. I'm going to give this it's an okay 3. That's what I'm going to give it. Ebon Battle Standard of Honor. 10 energy, 1 second activation time, 20 second recharge ward spell. You plant an Ebon Battle Standard of Honor at your current location. For 20 seconds, non-spirit allies in this area strike for plus 15 damage and an additional plus 10 against Char. So obviously this allows you to wreck Char. I actually like this one quite a bit. I'm going to give this one a 4. It increases damage a lot and is notably very good with minions because minions will get the plus 15 damage off of this. Now, it works a bit better either with Bone Fiends in kind of the backline area where it makes all of your casters auto attack stronger as well, or with the melee minions on like a warrior or an assassin or some frontline attacker running up into the front lines, dropping this, and then beginning attacking things. But the effect is very powerful, and I like this application of a ward as well. What's really interesting about this is this gives you a lot of additional power, but you have to then stay in a limited area, and your enemies can run outside of it, which creates some interesting zone-based dynamic play. I do think this is technically more powerful on, like, in the backline, buffing all of your backline attackers, just their auto attacks, making their auto attacks deal 15 more or 25 more damage against Char, as well as, like, Barrage or Volley. Those skills become terrifying with this up as well. So this is a strong implementation of Ward, and I like seeing offensive ones. And that brings us to the Ebon Battle Standard of Wisdom, which is 10 energy, 1 second activation time, 20 second recharge, ward spell. You plant an Ebon Battle Standard of Wisdom at your current location. For 20 seconds, non-spirit allies, I don't know why they have that clause here, but in this area, have a 60% chance to have the recharge time of spells they cast. This one, I don't know how to evaluate very well. The effect on its face seems quite strong in that having the recharge time of spells 60% of the time seems like something that can be quite powerful. So, for context, one of the offhands, or like one of the specific effects you can get on like a offhand, caster offhand, is 20% chance to have the recharge of spells, and it's always nice when that triggers. This triggers substantially more often than that. I feel, and like for all of your casters in the area, that's why the non-spirit closet seems kind of wonky to me. Spirits don't cast spells, as far as I'm aware. I think this is decent, but I'd really have to play with it as a caster to kind of see how good it is. I can see this being quite useful to like make some of the monk spells recharge in 2 seconds instead of 4. That matters. You feel that. And some of the like the elemental skills, like getting Rodgort's Invocation recharging 60% of the time in 4 seconds instead of 8, is something that I can see mattering. Stuff like that. So I would be up for giving this one a bit more time to try, but as it is, I'm going to go ahead and give it a 3 just because it's a kind of a big unknown. But I really like the spaces it's playing around in. Having some sort of support skill like this that makes skills recharge faster is really interesting, and I think that's a really interesting design space to play around in. I don't know how deep it is, but I feel like you could get at least a couple of skills playing around in that area, and I would like to see more, or would have liked to have seen more playing around in this particular design space, because I think it's an interesting one. Like, stuff around casting speeds and all of that sort of stuff, and recharge times and things, that feels like an area where there could have been more done with it in general. So I find this to be an interesting concept, and I like that. So, okay, Ebon Escape. Ebon Escape is 5 energy, quarter second cast time, 10 second recharge, spell, shadow step to target other ally. You and that ally are healed for 110 health. This is a tricky one to make good use of. So I mentioned this when I was talking about retreat, or return, excuse me. Retreat is a very different skill, but return, which shadow steps you to an ally and cripples enemies when you leave their area. this is a useful healing effect in that 110 health is actually pretty good, and it's 220 health in terms of healing you and the other ally. I feel that this is a 2 for me, though. The application use for this is a bit awkward. I can see using this in a couple of circumstances in terms of like being effective, because again, you can just use this as a bit of an awkward heal for other party members on a 10-second recharge, which is a little bit on the longer side for a self-heal or a party heal. But, you know, it doesn't require any attributes or anything, so that kind of makes it a little bit better. I can see using this as if you specifically want the sort of retreat effect, like you know that you're going to get yourself into situations where you want to get yourself out or back to healers or get yourself out of danger. I think that's the least interesting way of using it. I can see using this on like a character with a lot of touch range heal skills or something, like a Duena's Touch, Dervish. I could see using this to get over to an ally I want to heal with that and heal them kind of on the way in as well. I can see using this specifically to defend your backline as a melee attacker, to say, hey, I'm going to Ebon Escape over to this ally. It's more like Ebon Aid at that point, but Ebon Escape over to that ally to be able to defend them and heal them in the process. Or like to get up to the front line, for example. This can sort of piggyback off of, say, an assassin's shadow step. So if you give, say, an assassin hero Death's Charge, they Death's Charge in, you Ebon Escape after them to get in. I can see situations like that, but I do feel like this is a very situational skill where you're kind of considering how you're using it, and I don't feel like this is one that I generally would just plop on a bar. But it's not like it's a reasonable effect, is what I'm going to say. Ebon Vanguard Assassin Support. So this is 10 energy, 1 second cast time, 30-second recharge spell. Summon a level 20 Ebon Vanguard Assassin that has Iron Palm, Fox Fangs, and Ninetail Strike. This summoned assassin shadow steps to target foe. If that target foe is a char, the assassin lives for 30 seconds. If they're not a char, it only lives for 15. Doesn't really matter. Iron Palm has a 20-second recharge, so technically it could get its combo off a second time if it's against a char, but usually dies pretty quickly. So that the char clause is nice, but not... It's small peanuts. It's like a 10% better sort of thing, not a 100% better. So a couple of important notes about this one. Iron Palm is a touch skill that counts as a lead attack, so that leads into Fox Fangs and the Ninetail Strike. This whole combo is unblockable. Iron Palm is a skill, therefore it can't be blocked. Fox Fangs and Ninetail Strike are both inherently unblockable offhand and dual attacks, respectively. Iron Palm also specifically will knock down hexed and conditioned foes, which is really useful to be aware of. You can use this on an enemy. It summons the assassin basically at that enemy. It basically shadow steps into existence. Think of it that way. And then immediately uses Iron Palm. So it always opens up with its combo. So you can use this as a somewhat reliable knockdown against hexed and conditioned enemies that can be knocked down. There are some class of enemies that can't be. This is an extremely powerful skill. That combo deals a lot of damage. It's very disruptive because it can be quite reliable to get that knockdown off. And then the assassin will hang around for a little while, auto-attacking things. I did not check to see if this works with the these skills or not. I'm going to go ahead and toss this onto my bar and test it later, because that would be really interesting to know. I didn't even think about it until just now. This is I'm going to give this one a 5. I like this one a lot, and I will bring this quite often. It is extraordinarily powerful. Again, disruptive, high damage, has this assassin that hangs around for a while distracting things. So incredibly powerful skill. Kind of the the best summon skill in the regards of the PvE summon skills, I think, as well. Okay, so that brings us to Ebon Vanguard Sniper support, which is 10 energy, 1 second cast time, 15 second recharge spell. Target foe is struck for 90 piercing damage and begins bleeding for 25 seconds. Alright, the piercing damage can be reduced. This attack has a 10% chance of doing an additional 900 piercing damage. You'll get a little quote in the chat as well. Something like one shot, one kill, or other things like that. If it's a char that you're using this spell on, it's a 25% chance of doing the additional 900 piercing damage. I think instead of the 10%, I believe. This is more fun than powerful. It is decidedly not reliable, although it becomes more reliable against char. I actually was chatting with somebody the other day, and they were talking about using this with the Elementalist skill Stone Striker that makes all of your outgoing damage Earth, and then Intensity, which makes your next elemental damage, like spell, deal area of effect, to convert this into area of effect Earth damage. And just every now and then you just pop a group for like 700 damage or something, and it's absolutely ridiculous. That to me is really cool. It's not something that's going to happen very often. But like I said, this skill is more fun than good. But man, is it fun. So I'm going to give this guy a 3 because I don't think it's that powerful. I don't necessarily bring it all that often, but man, does it deserve a score for being fun. And that, I like this sort of design. This is a very coin flip magic card type skill as well. It's good times. Good times. Not powerful times, but good times. Signet of Infection. So this is 1 second activation time, 10 second recharge Signet. If target foe is bleeding, that foe is diseased for 20 seconds. This is not a bad way of inflicting disease. Again, if they can't be basically diseased and bleed both require fleshy targets. So if they can't be bled, they can't be diseased. So it doesn't really matter either way. Like that's something that could be like burning. If it was off of burning, like then it like, well, there are foes that can be set on fire that can't be diseased. So it would be worth mentioning. But I bring that up just because it's something that has come up. So I wanted to kind of. Okay, I don't need to keep going on that. So this is kind of okay. It's a fairly lengthy disease duration. No energy requirement is really nice. Requiring bleed is a little bit of a hurdle. I just don't think this is an especially powerful skill. I feel like this feels to me like a 2. Diseased is nice in that it spreads among like-type enemies. And so it's good from that standpoint, but I don't know. This one just doesn't feel terribly exciting. It's not hard to necessarily inflict bleed if you want to. I just don't necessarily try to, so it tends to be more incidental if I'm inflicting bleeding. I could see trying to run this specifically if you are doing that and trying to do more of a condition-y pressure type build. Those builds tend to be a bit overkill, or so a lot of normal mode PvE, which is most of what I do, the enemies are not that durable, so they go down more quickly than you really worry about damage over time conditions doing to them. So if I'm specifically trying to inflict a disease in something like a fragility build, I actually would prefer like Avatar of Grenth, which pops out very short duration diseases in an area of effect, because that short duration is going to trigger fragility more often. Something like this becomes less exciting in those situations. I don't know. This feels like one of those skills where it's not a bad skill, it just doesn't have a strong home, if that makes sense, which is kind of where it kind of gets a score from more. Sneak Attack. So Sneak Attack is interesting. So it's 5 energy, 5 second recharge. It is a melee attack, but you'll also notice that last sentence says this attack counts as a lead attack. So you can use this with any melee weapon, but if you use it with daggers, you can follow up with anything that requires lead attacks. So, for example, you could follow it up with a standard offhand attack such as Fox Fangs or Wild Strike or whatever. So this can slot into an assassin combo chain at the start of one, but you can also just use this with a scythe. So anyway, sneak attack is a melee attack. If it hits, then the foe you hit is blinded for 8 seconds. So it works really well with a scythe for AoE blind, and you'll notice that this can be kept up indefinitely. 5 energy, 5-second cooldown, voila, 8-second duration. 8-second duration to 5-second cooldown. So this is especially useful when fighting the Doppelganger, because the Doppelganger does not get to use PvE-Only Skills, if I remember correctly, in the Augury Rock mission. So you can use something like Sneak Attack and just sneak attack him into a dagger combo chain, and it can't use the offhand or dual attack because it can't use the lead attack, and you can totally cheese it that way. Special usage. I like this skill okay. I'm going to give it a 3. I think it's relatively powerful in that inflicting blind like this is pretty good, but it doesn't deal any additional damage or something like that. It's more of a control skill. Could be quite useful on like an Unseen Fury Assassin, I suppose, or with like Signet of Shadows or something. And like I already mentioned, works well with sides, but an interesting design too, in that they're giving you a melee attack to inflict blind. But I can also see this being useful in the Norn fighting tournament, because this probably just gives Magni the Bison a royal headache, because he does not want to be blind. So kind of a good general purpose sort of skill, but not like a stellar one. Tryptophan Signet. So tryptophan is a reference to a substance found in like turkey and things like that that's known for making you sleepy. It's often attributed to why people feel so tired on Thanksgiving after a big meal, but my understanding is those reports are maybe a little overblown, but because in part the tryptophan concentration isn't that high in turkey. Anyway, Tryptophan Signet is 1 second activation time, 15-second recharge. Signet, for 20 seconds, target foe and all adjacent foes move and attack 40% slower. This is extremely powerful. It costs no energy and has permanent uptime, 100% uptime. It compares very favorably, in my opinion, to Shared Burden, which, because I have Gwen just sitting over here, is really easy for me to go show to you. I mean, she doesn't have Illusion Magic Spect on... Wait, Illusion Magic would be down here. She doesn't have Illusion Magic Spect, so I can't, like... I'd have to change a bunch of things. I don't reflect on that. But Shared Burden is very similar. Now, this is nearby and also affects spellcasting for 50%. You can easily get those up to the same sort of uptime. Tryptophan Signet, in contrast, does not affect spellcasting and is adjacent, but it also doesn't cost any energy. So I think this is actually quite powerful, but I just don't tend to think of it or use it that often. And these sort of effects, like, are subtle in their power. So I think I probably underrate this one a good bit as well. So I'm torn between like a 3 and a 4. I think I'm going to go ahead being a little generous and give it a 4, because I do think that it has a lot of subtle power. It's a snare. It decreases the damage you take by slowing enemy attacks and all that sort of stuff. Maybe a 4 is a little overly generous to it because the AoE is somewhat narrow. But no energy for that effect seems really good, especially given how long it lasts and the fact that it's not a hex, so it can't be removed as well, which can be significant in some areas. So, powerful effect. Weakness Trap. So Weakness Trap is 10 energy, 2-second activation time, 30-second recharge. Trap, as you might expect given its name. When Weakness Trap is triggered, all nearby foes are weakened for 20 seconds and take 50 lightning damage for some reason. All char are knocked down. That's nice. Weakness Trap ends after 90 seconds, and while activating the skill, you are easily interrupted. This is another one of those skills that I look at and I'm like, not really interested. It has all the same problems as the Black Powder Mine. You're easily interrupted while using it. It's awkward to use in the middle of combat. This one is a little bit more interesting in effect. Weakness, 50 lightning damage, but Black Powder Mine had a shorter recharge, didn't it? 20 seconds, I believe. And blinded. Blind is stronger than weakness for mitigating damage. Knocking down Char is nice, but of course, obviously, you have to be fighting Char. I'm going to give this one a 2. I don't feel like it's awful, but it is awfully specific in when you'd want to use this, and I'm not terribly excited by it. I don't even know if there's anything that cares about dealing lightning damage that this would be able to trigger or not. I don't know. It seems very underwhelming to me. I don't quite know why they made this skill either. I don't know. Maybe to allow warriors, or maybe to allow other characters to get into the trapper game if you're doing some sort of trapping the underworld. That's something people did at one point in time, right? Anyway, that brings us to wins. This, from what I've seen on the wiki, might be a resurrected skill that once existed in like the beta of the game. But anyway, wins is 5 energy, 5-second activation time, 30-second recharge. Ebon Vanguard ritual create a level 10 spirit. All foes within its range have a 15% chance to miss with ranged attacks, and the spirit dies after 90 seconds. Apparently, this might have, at one point in time, been bugged and affect all creatures, because it's kind of a revamped nature ritual. It looks like a nature ritual and all that sort of thing. This just seems really, really bad to me. Like, 15% chance to miss with ranged attacks does decrease ranged damage, but a lot of the time... So that's mostly useful if you're in an area with a lot of rangers or paragons or something. Most of the time it's spells and melee attackers that I'm most concerned about, just because they tend to be proportionally higher. So like this does do some damage mitigation. 15% is what, about 1/6, 1/7 of attacks, something like that, which sounds higher when you say it that way than when you say it percentagely. I don't know, though. 5-second activation is just so long that this just feels aggressively clunky to try to use. And so, for its clunkiness and its overall very weak effects, I'm just never interested in this. I'm going to give this one a 1. It just seems so aggressively unexciting and weak to me. I just don't know when I would want to ever actually try to make use of this. So, I'm going to give it... a very low score as a result. The flavor is there, though, of things getting blown off course, at least. I would probably give this skill like more of a 2 if it had like a 1 second or less activation time, but 5 seconds is just way too long. Okay, that brings us to our Lightbringer skills. So Lightbringer skills all care about demonic servants of Abaddon. Lightbringer Signet requires you to be within the area of one, and Lightbringer's Gaze requires you to target one. Demonic servants of Abaddon is a somewhat general-sounding term, but it's very specific. It counts Margonites and specifically the specific demon enemies, so like Reign of Terror and things like that. You'll find some of these in some of the later missions. I think it might also be able to target the Harbingers. I'm not sure, but you'll find some of those, or you'll find those primarily in the later Nightfall missions and in the Realm of Torment. That means these skills are effectively useless outside of those areas. That automatically makes these guys 2s. I'll talk about them, but just be aware both of these are 2s because they're only useful in very specific circumstances. You have to be fighting demonic servants of Abaddon. If you are not, they do nothing. So Lightbringer Signet is 1/4 second activation, 25-second recharge, a little bit long. It is a Signet. If you are within the area of a demonic servant of Abaddon, you gain 5 strikes of adrenaline and 24 energy. This is extremely powerful in terms of fueling you up. You do have to be within the area, which is a decent-sized area of effect, but it does mean you have to be kind of close. It's almost half spellcasting range, I guess. I would have to actually check to verify that, but it does mean you have to be a little bit closer than you'd think to be able to make use of this. And like I said, this only works if there's a demonic servant of Abaddon in the area. So it only works against very specific enemies. but it does gain you a bunch of adrenaline and a ton of energy. So this is an incredibly powerful resource management skill, but only in those circumstances. This is only for very specific builds and for very specific areas, so not in any way general purpose skill. That's why it gets 2. Same thing with Lightbringer's Gaze in that it's a very specific one. So this is 5 energy, 1 second activation time, 15 second recharge. It is a skill, not a spell. I don't know why, but here it is. Target demonic servant of Abaddon takes 100 holy damage and is interrupted. Randomly, this appears to care about armor for some reason, because it will deal less damage to some and more damage to others, so there is some inconsistency in its damage, and I don't know why. Also, this skill strikes 1 additional foe in the area for each rank of Lightbringer you have attained, and then it disables itself for 15 seconds after it is used, so you cannot shorten the recharge for some reason. Does work well with a certain Air of Superiority to recharge it, I guess, though. One really important thing to call out, the additional foe in the area of your target does not have to be Demonic Servant of Abaddon. This will hit anything, but you cannot use this skill unless you have a Demonic Servant of Abaddon to target. So, if you target just a standard enemy, Lightbringer's Gaze will be like invalid target. So you can only activate it against Demonic Servants of Abaddon, but for each rank of Lightbringer, it will hit an additional foe in the area regardless of whether or not they are Servant of Abaddon. The interrupt is nice. The 100 holy damage is pretty good. That's still 100 damage even if it's not armor ignoring. Again, I don't know why it isn't armor ignoring damage. I would expect it to be being holy damage, but for some reason it isn't. It does, of course, because you're targeting a Demonic Servant of Abaddon, get the increased damage from Lightbringer as well. So that's useful to be aware of. This one scales up quite well. But again, this is only useful when you're fighting Demonic Servants of Abaddon. So I do find that an interesting way of doing things. However, there are, I guess, the Madness Titans and stuff too. I don't know that the Titans in Hell's Precipice and the Titan quests afterwards are affected by this skill, though. I think they might technically be Servants of Abaddon, but they aren't affected. There are other enemies that you'll find in those areas that are also not Demonic Servants of Abaddon. The Shidoken are specifically servants of Shido Tagachi. They are not affected by this. The shadow enemies, like Shadow Monk, Shadow Priest, etc., are servants of Menzies, the half-brother of Balthazar, I want to say. They are not affected by this. I don't believe they're targetable by this either. And the Graven monoliths, I think. Are they Graven or Carven? I think they're Graven. The Graven monoliths are also not considered demonic servants. So Lightbringer's Gaze and Lightbringer's Signet are a bit more specific than they might seem on their surface. They do not affect every enemy that you'll encounter in Torment areas. So be aware of that. But that said, they are incredibly powerful when fighting actual demonic servants of Abaddon and are well worth bringing in those situations or considering. They're just useless outside of those because they literally don't do anything. Norn title track skills. So we'll start with Dodge This. Dodge This. Now keep in mind, I don't have 5 Norn. I have 4 Norn, which sounds like forlorn, but it's not. So if I drag this over here where I don't have to worry about the thing. I have Slayer of Giants. I'd need Slayer of Worms to get full effect from these. So these are going to be a little bit under what their final values would be. So anyway, Dodge This is a Matrix reference, and it is 4 adrenaline, shout. For 19 seconds, your next attack, so this is a shout that applies to you. Your next attack cannot be blocked and does plus 19 damage. So this one's okay. It's useful on like Ranger randomly because it gives you an unblockable plus 19 damage attack, and you don't have use for adrenaline otherwise. So because the fact that this can affect ranged attacks as well as any other attacks is useful. Keep in mind, with something like Barrage or Volley, it does not apply to every hit of those. Those are like separate individual attacks per one. So think of this as being fairly similar in that regard to Find Their Weakness, in that it triggers off of sort of the first attack and not the rest of them. Which is different from, like, I think if you a normal Scythe Swing hits multiple enemies, this damage should be applied to each enemy that's hit. Or I think like Cyclone Axe, maybe this would apply to each one. I would have to test those to know specifically, but This is an okay skill. It's not exciting. It has some of the same problems as the dwarf brawling type skills in that it's a shout, so it doesn't refund you the adrenaline it costs to use, so it's a little clunky in that regard. It does stack with other attacks, though, so you can make one really powerful attack, which is kind of cool. Apply this, and then use some sort of powerful energy to attack, such as power attack or penetrating shot or something like that. So it's fine. This is like a 3. It's a fine skill. It's kind of like a weird pseudo attack. But it's not like the most exciting skill or anything, and certainly not the most powerful Norn skill either. That's probably you move like a dwarf. We'll get to that one. Norns have a lot of shouts for some reason. It is notable that if you are a Paragon, this will get you some energy back from leadership. It'll get you 2 energy back if you have enough leadership for 2 energy, 4 leadership or more. Worth mentioning. Finish Him. Finish Him is 10 energy, 15-second recharge, shout. If target foe has less than 50% health, apparently this is 50% of their initial maximum health, so if they have effects that increase their maximum health, like Endure Pain, it's actually going to be below 50%, I've heard, when I was looking at some of these things. But anyway, if target foe is less than 50% health, that foe takes 73, probably 75, with full Norn damage, and suffers from cracked armor and a deep wound for 18 seconds. This is an incredibly powerful skill for finishing off enemies. It happens right away, it deals a lot of armor-ignoring damage, and the deep wound is also a lot of additional damage. And I believe the shout, the damage from the shout will trigger the deep wound, as it were. I talked about this in a previous episode, but deep wounds won't, like, take effect, per se, until you, like, hit them, or at least it doesn't seem to be the case until they take the next hit of damage. So having something that deals damage after the deep wound kind of confirms the deep wound. I'm using finger quotes that you can't see, but kind of confirms the deep wound in a way where it kind of like applies the effect. That's not 100% accurate, but anyway, Finish Him is extraordinarily powerful. I'm going to give this one a 4. I don't always bring it or anything like that, but it is very powerful and a very powerful way of finishing off enemies. So it's a very strong skill. That brings us to I Am Unstoppable. I was mentioning this one earlier. This is 5 energy, 30-second recharge, shout. For 19 seconds, you have plus 24 armor and cannot be knocked down or crippled. This is a runner's dream. Runners love this skill. So running is specifically, I mentioned it earlier actually when I was talking about Dwarven stability, but to define running, it's the practice of going from one outpost to another while ignoring all of the enemies. So this was commonly done in the Shiver Peaks running from Beacon's Perch to Drockner's Forge, known as the Drockner Run. This would be used to get characters from a very early game location, Beacon's Perch, to the late game location of Drockner's Forge. That became less important as campaigns and stuff released. The significance of that was Drockner's Forge was the first place you could get max strength armor in Prophecies. So the Drockner's Run was... Plus, it would, like, jump you past a ton of missions, so you could go straight to the last missions in the game. It's a great spot to get a lot of experience. There's power leveling services that would work out of Drockner's Forge, where basically you'd join somebody's party, they'd go farm a bunch of higher level enemies, and you could get the experience from that, while at low level to get a lot more experience, because when enemies are much higher level than you get an experience bonus. So that was a whole thing that was in the game for a while. And I Am Unstoppable, admittedly very late to the party, is very useful for that. It would also be useful for like a Sanctum K run, where you'd take somebody from, say, like Lion's Arch or something, and you'd run them to Sanctum K, which is the mission that you have to complete to get to the desert, the Crystal Desert, which can be useful, as well as useful if you're running somebody from Lion's Arch back to Ascalon, which you might do, or you could even run somebody from like Ascalon to LA to Lion's Arch. So all of those runs are something where what you're basically doing is you'd be either doing it yourself, or if you're a high enough level character and capable of doing it, or you'd hire another player to do it, to basically take you to an outpost that you had not previously been, so you could now have access to it and fast travel access and all that sort of good stuff. So I'm Unstoppable is really useful for runners, because being knocked down and being crippled are two of the things that can cause a run to fail. because being knocked down obviously means that you can't run, everybody can gang up on you and kill you, and crippled obviously slows you down, which can lead to the same thing. So very useful for running. Also extremely useful in zones where there are knockdowns happening. It's a generally useful and powerful skill in that regard, but it's not everywhere that you kind of want this effect. So it's specifically useful if you are going up against like Mind Shock or other skills like that, Gale, Whirlwind, Gust. If you're going into areas or like against Hammer Warriors, it does tend to be more useful either to stop like knockdowns just in general, like on casters, or with melee attackers. Being able to stop cripple can be really useful if you're going to be in a location with a lot of cripple. This makes lava a lot less obnoxious, because lava, the way lava works in this game is while you're standing in lava, like every second or every 3 seconds or something like that, you're set on fire and crippled. So for like 3-5 seconds, something like that. So you're just constantly taking damage from burning, and you can't move through it very quickly because you're crippled. If you use I am unstoppable, all of a sudden lava can't cripple you, so you can just walk through it at regular speed, which is nice. Although, obviously it doesn't help your heroes or anything any. This is one of those skills where it's like, I think that this deserves a 2, because it's incredibly powerful counter, but it's not like... It's countering something that's useful to counter, but often there's just going to be other skills that are going to be more useful than it in general use case. But there are certain circumstances where this is really nice, really useful, really strong. I also really like this against the Tundra Giants that you encounter in the Southern Shiver Peaks areas, because those enemies, I think they can knock down when they land critical hits. So it's really nice to be able to stop that. So that's really, I guess, about all I have to say about I Am Unstoppable. It's a powerful effect. It's a shout, so it can't be removed. But note, it can be stopped by things like Vocal Minority. Just be aware of that. Okay. I am the strongest. So this is 5 energy, 20-second recharge, shout. Your next 7 attacks do an additional plus 19 damage. I don't know if this goes to 8 attacks or not, but it probably goes to at least 20 damage with Hunter of Worms. This is actually a really powerful effect. Like, right now, let's just say, that's like 140 damage off of this thing or something like that, almost. So this does actually add quite a bit of additional damage to your attacks. But I feel like this is one of those things that's kind of like, yeah, that's okay. There are other ways of increasing your attack damage. Specifically, if you're a melee attacker, Strength of Honor is going to be fairly comparable to this, but permanent uptime. But an enchantment, so it can be removed. I don't know. I think this one's probably pretty reasonable, but not like the most exciting. I'm going to give this one a 3. I am Unstoppable is a skill that I tend to use way more often in practical cases, just because there are times where I really want to be able to stop knockdown. That's the main reason why I use this skill. The plus 24 armor is nice, but the knockdown stopping is what this is really about. So I don't tend to bring this skill more often, so just keep in mind how the ratings work. I mean, it's over here, right? For a reason. Okay, no reason to dwell on that. Let's go ahead and move on to You Are All Weaklings. So this is 5... Actually, I'm going to take a moment here while I'm kind of thinking. Effects like this, like I Am the Strongest, if it was like You Are the Strongest and was like target allies, next 7 attacks do an additional 19 damage, that would be an amazing Paragon skill. And I wish Paragon had gone down that direction. Something like You Are All Weaklings kind of fits into where Paragon could be as well in terms of like effect, if not necessarily name. So this is 5 energy, 12-second recharge, shout. Target foe and foes adjacent to target are weakened for 11 seconds. Like, that would be a sweet Paragon skill, but no, we don't have that. That's probably a little bit more warrior if it's going to be offensive, and Paragon's a little bit more defensive, but it's not well defined anyway. So You Are All Weaklings, like I just read, this is okay. Adjacent range is a little bit small. Enfeebling Blood is basically kind of like this, but better as far as I'm concerned. It's not a bad skill, it's just... I don't want to spend a PvE skill slot on a skill that I can just bring on a Necromancer, if that makes sense. I want something that's more powerful, that has more impact, more oomph to it. So I think You Are All Weaklings is going to have to be like a 2. It does do a thing, but a lot of the time I have better ways of having weakness happen. I could see there being some circumstances where I could want this, but they feel kind of few and far between. And there would have to be situations where for some reason I'm not able to bring Enfeebling Blood or something like that, and I really want to inflict weakness. Or even like elementalists, air magic stuff that inflicts weakness and stuff like that. So, I don't know. You move like a dwarf. Kind of an interesting racial insult, but anyway, it's 10 energy, 10-second recharge, shout. Target foe is knocked down and takes 73 damage, and then they're crippled for 14 seconds. I imagine this goes up to 75 damage in 15 seconds, but because people like round numbers. This is one of the more powerful PvE-only skills. It is an instant knockdown that also deals a good chunk of armor-ignoring damage and then leaves enemies crippled as a nice bonus on top of it, with only a 10-second recharge. Its 10 energy is well worth it. This is one of the more powerful interrupts in the game, because knocking down things interrupts stuff. It's one of the better snares in the game. You knock down the enemy and then you can chase after them because they're now crippled. And it just does a lot of armor-ignoring damage too, which is a nice bonus on top of all of that. This is a 5 for me. This is just a ridiculously powerful skill. And I like it quite a lot because it is, like I said, a ridiculously powerful skill. Yeah, there's not much more to say about it than that. The fact that this is a shout does mean it's susceptible to things like Vocal Minority, Well of Silence, and stuff like that. But it is such a powerful skill. Such a powerful skill. So, a Touch of Guile. This is 5 energy, 3/4 second activation time, 15-second recharge, hex spell. Target touched foe takes 73 damage, and if that foe was knocked down, that foe cannot attack for 7 seconds. This is a really powerful effect. I've talked about it before with like Pacifism and Amity, which were monk hexes that prevented the opponent from being able to attack, but they ended whenever the enemy was dealt damage or attacked or something like that. This doesn't have that. The complaint that I had about the design of those skills is that they're not interactive. That's less of an issue when you're using them on AI, which is probably the only case where you're using a Touch of Guile, because these are PvE-only skills. You can't bring them to PvP, so you can't use them against players. 7 seconds, 8 seconds maybe is reasonable duration for that sort of effect. And this is a very powerful way of mitigating damage. A bit awkward to use. I haven't tried to use it much because you do need to be inflicting knockdown to really make this worthwhile. The 73 damage is not bad, but it's an interesting design space, and this almost feels like it should have been a Deldrimor skill rather than a Norn skill. Norn don't feel like Guile. Like, a Touch of Guile doesn't make sense for Norn, but it feels like something that might have been a Deldrimor skill that was moved to Norn because Deldrimor had so many skills to begin with. I don't know. But yeah, anyway, a Touch of Guile, I think I'm going to give it a 2 because I do feel like you do have to put in a lot of effort to build around it to make it work successfully. I don't know how powerful it really is if you do that, because I haven't really messed with that much. But it seems like something that could be strong, maybe. The fact that it's a hex and not a skill is probably good, because it does mean it can be removed and is not, like, from a design standpoint, having powerful effects like this be something that can be removed is probably good. Of course, enemies may or may not have hex removal, and it's not something that they're really building around, if that makes sense. But anyway, let's go ahead and move on to Club of 1,000 Bears. Fun name. So this is 5 energy, 12-second recharge, melee attack. Works with any melee weapon. If this attack hits, it deals plus 8 damage for each adjacent foe, maximum of 60 damage. So I don't know if this goes up to like 9 or 10 at full Norn, but probably. You still have to have quite a few enemies around you. At the plus 8, I would need to have 8 enemies around me to get the maximum damage, but that could be quite a lot. And then if the targeted foe, so the enemy you attack with this, is non-human, they are knocked down. So the damage from this is like fine. The recharge is a little bit long. The real use of this skill is the knockdown, but that's very conditional. yeah, the non-human clause is quite a tricky one to work around. So obviously it works against like dwarves and char and things like that. There's a lot of enemies that this does work against, but there are a lot of human enemies. There's bandits. There are the White Mantle, notably. The gangs in Kaineng and Luxons and Kurziks and all that sort of stuff. Eye of the North doesn't tend to have tons of humans that you're fighting against. Nightfall does have some, the Cornins, largely. So this one, if you want a knockdown melee attack that deals a decent amount of plus damage or can, then this is reasonable. Keep in mind, having a ton of enemies adjacent to you is not always likely. Works super well on a scythe. I'm going to give this one a 2. I feel like this is one of those things that where it's like, this is okay, but it has to be, like, I have to know that I'm going into an area where there aren't human enemies and where I really do want the knockdown effect and stuff to really consider this skill. Maybe it's one that I can reasonably bring a good bit of the time, but I'm going to prefer something like Whirlwind Attack as a PvE-only skill above Club of 1,000 Bears a lot of the time, because I'd rather deal damage in an area of effect than knock down like a single target or whatever. Stacks up favorably against Reaper Sweep, though, for what that's worth. Yeah, I guess that's kind of how I feel about this guy. Feel No Pain. So Feel No Pain is 5 energy, 20-second recharge skill. For 30 seconds, you have +3 health regeneration. If you are drunk when activating this skill, you also have plus 280, probably 300 at full Norn, maximum health. So this is the Norn skill that has drunk effects to it. The plus health is not like the biggest deal. In a pinch, it's really useful. Don't get me wrong. But working with the drunk stuff is kind of awkward. This is... I mean, I like this better than Mending because this is less energy. It's 5 energy every approximately 30 seconds, which becomes quite a small amount. And plus 3 health regeneration is what Mending is, except this can't be removed. Yay! So if you like Mending, Feel No Pain is a superior choice that doesn't require you to be a monk and spec and all that stuff. So I feel like this is okay. I'm going to give this guy a 3 because, I mean, this is 100% uptime plus 3 health regeneration. That's actually stronger than it sounds on the surface, just in kind of like a over time sort of thing. I don't think it's an amazing skill, but I kind of want to, I don't know, give it a little bit of something. I like it a little bit better than like Club of 1,000 Bears, for example. But and I like it better than You Are All Weaklings. And that's 6 HP per second. That adds up. Okay, so that brings us to these blessings. These blessings are all forms. They're all elite forms, but they don't change your appearance. I'm going to come right out and say I don't like the design of these skills. The reason why is that they change all of your attacks. They change your skill bar to a separate set of skills that are kind of based on that aspect. I would have to specifically look at which each of them are. They're also all elites, so they take up your elite slot. My biggest problem with them is that I find that to be very uninteresting mechanically. What you're basically doing, like, you get access to a second skill bar, and that could be really interesting if these skills had been set up more like maintain enchantments or some other design, but they're all very uniform, and to me, the interest in this game is making different builds. So I don't want to just bring, say, Raven Blessing and take on the aspect of the Raven and have Raven skills, because that's just making me have a very specific playstyle. I want to use the build system, and so these prevent me from being able to make effective use of the build system. So from a design standpoint, I feel that these are playing counter to what I enjoy most about the game, so I really don't like that design aspect of them. I wish that there had been some other approach taken with them. I wish that they changed your appearance, because that would have been really cool. Admittedly difficult to do, and they would have had to put a lot of time into making those forms, but something that they could have done. But I don't know. I don't like the inherent design of these because I find it to be very unenjoyable to trade all of my skills that I have chosen to use for myself for like this set of skills. And I'm really glad that the avatars do not work that way, that the avatars don't give you Balthazar skills or Lissa skills, but it's like, no, this is a skill that you're using and build around and stuff. And that to me is interesting. And I wish that these blessings had been skills that I build around rather than just be like, here, you don't want to put time into working the build system, have this pile of somewhat powerful skills. So that's my general complaint about the design of these. Let's go ahead and go through them. So one other thing that I'm going to say is that the way that these are designed was inherently difficult to balance because they make things extremely uniform. So I'll talk about that in a moment. They're all 10 energy, 60-second recharge with no activation time. So Raven Blessing is an elite form. You lose all effects, so that includes like enchantments, skills, anything that you have on you, because taking that into the Raven form was powerful. So you lose all effects and take on the aspect of the Raven. For 60 seconds, you have 80 armor, 692 health, and a 28% chance to block. All your attributes are set to 0, and Raven attacks replace your skills. So, all your attributes are set to 0 means that you don't have any of the sort of the unique effects that you'd get from your attributes, like, assassins getting additional energy on critical hits and stuff. These skills are extremely hard to balance. When they initially came out, they worked differently. It would basically turn your energy into sort of a duration for these, and whenever you like took damage or dealt damage, you'd gain energy. Very similar to how they work in the missions in which you get to make use of them. So that's like a gate too far. Basically, the 3 Norn missions, the specific Norn ones, give you the use of these. So there's the Raven one that you get in the Raven's Point mission with Olaf Olafsson. There's the Bear one that you get when you clear Bjorn Marches in Blood Washes Blood. And then there's Curse of the Norn Bear where you get the Wolf one. That gives you a much more accurate representation of how they were. But one of the things that you'll see with this is this sets your armor level, your health, and whatnot. So this basically erases all of the identity your character has with their profession in terms of mechanical identity. You function in a uniform way. And all of these do this. All of them set your armor, they set your maximum health, and whatnot. And so by doing that, all of these are making you a uniform thing. And that became extremely difficult to balance because what would happen, and what happened initially, is Urson Blessing was the strongest one initially, and I don't know if that's the case now or not. But there was a time where the PvE meta was get to these blessings, grind up your Norn title track, because at one point in time, these reached max effectiveness not at level 5, but at level 10, which is the maximum level, and took a lot of work to get up to. So basically, to do PvE, you would have to grind your Norn up to 10 and get your Urson Blessing, and then it didn't matter what profession you were, none of that mattered, because you just go in and you just keep Urson Blessing up 100% of the time and just Urson Ball everything to death. And that was the meta for a period of time after Eye of the North released, because these skills were inherently difficult to balance, because they erased individuality and all of that sort of stuff. And I just dislike that design. In terms of power, I'm honestly going to kind of give these all low skills, low ratings. I'm going to give them all 2s. I'm going to go ahead and talk about each one of them a little bit, but the reason why I'm giving them all 2s is not based on power level, but it's based on my interest of playing with them. I think that these can be interesting to play with every now and then, but a lot of the time I don't have an interest in doing so. I want to play with all of the other skills in the game rather than the very set skill bar that these blessings provide. So I'm uninterested in them in that standpoint, because they do not interact with the part of the game I'm interested in. They're potentially more powerful than a 2, but that's just kind of representing my desire to play with them. So Raven Blessing gives you some decent tankiness. Again, I'd have to look at these individual skills if I really wanted to kind of evaluate them properly. and I'm not going to do that until after I go through all of these, but I think I will check them out more afterwards, just that way I can talk about them a bit more. Urson Blessing is you lose all effects, take on the aspect of the bear. For 60 seconds, you have 100 armor and 790 health. So this makes you really tanky. 100 armor halves damage that you take from armor-respecting sources. And then there's Wolfen Blessing, which you take on the aspect of the wolf. For 60 seconds, you have 80 armor, so 80 just like the Raven. 692 health, same as the Raven, and 4 health regeneration. So the health regen also makes you kind of tankier by healing you for a bunch. Yeah, again, I'm going to give these all, like I said, I gave these all 2s just to represent my lack of interest in using them a lot of the time, just because they erase the individuality, and that's the part of the game that I like the most. So from that standpoint, I'm super uninterested in them. But that said, I will take a look at them later, so that way we can kind of see what they do. Let's go ahead and slot Raven's Blessing on right now. Okay, so that gets us through all of those skills. So now we just have a couple skills left to specifically talk about in this portion. So the next one is Sunspear Rebirth Signet. Sunspear Rebirth Signet actually kind of requires a knowledge of Resurrection Signet because it's and Rebirth is kind of a mixture of those, but it's got a 3-second activation time. That's the only sort of sad about it, because it's a Signet, doesn't cost energy, it doesn't naturally recharge. So this is a Signet. Resurrect target dead party member at your location with full health and 10% energy for each Sunspear rank you have attained. The Signet can only be used once per mission unless recharged by a morale boost. So this one, okay, so for context, this is a version of Resurrection Signet that has a rebirth clause to it where it teleports the person to you and then can give them more energy based on your rank. The fact that this is a one-shot skill unless it's recharged by like a morale boost, or apparently zoning recharges it as well, makes me generally uninterested in it. I will say this: if you, as a player, have the spare PvE slot and you were going to bring Resurrection Signet, you should bring Sunspear Rebirth Signet instead, because it is very likely a superior skill. On this character is rank 8 in Sunspear. They're going to be resurrected with 80% energy. That's pretty good. Full health and 80% energy is phenomenal. However, if this had a recharge or standard recharge, I would like this skill. It does not. Even if it was like 120-second recharge, this skill would be fine, if a little bit pricey. The fact that it only recharges on morale boosts is very, very restrictive. Therefore, I'm going to give this thing a 2. I just don't want this most of the time. If I am bringing a Resurrect, I want it to be repeatable, so that way I can get my party back up. The fact that it warps the party member to me is great, but I'd rather just bring Rebirth with no attribute point investment, and because that allows me to be able to flee the battle and then resurrect my allies slowly. Sunspear Rebirth Signet is just not... It's that once per mission clause is just so restrictive that I don't want to work with it from that standpoint. So I appreciate that they made this skill, but I just, most of the time, I don't want this effect, because most of the time, if I am bringing a Resurrect, I want something that I can repeatedly use and doesn't require a morale boost. Now, you get a morale boost either from like a triggered event, so completing some sort of objective will give you a morale boost sometimes, or the most common way of getting one is defeating a boss. So boss enemies, when you kill them, you get a morale boost. That recharges all of your skills, and that will include Sunspear Rebirth Signet. So I think this is a usable skill. It's just I'm not especially fond of it. Okay, so that brings us to Resurrection Signet. Resurrection Signet is our last skill that's going to get a rating in this entire thing. So Resurrection Signet is also 3-second activation time. It's very similar to Sunspear Rebirth Signet because, again, Sunspear Rebirth Signet was based on Resurrection Signet. Resurrection Signet is, it's been around since Prophecies. So it is a Signet. Resurrect target party member. That party member is returned to life with 100% health and 25% energy. This signet only recharges when you gain a morale boost. So in PvE, I'm probably never bringing this personally. This is a very good PvP skill because in PvP, morale boosts tends to be more common. Having the ability to get your party member back up with 100% health in only 3 seconds. Keep in mind, most resurrects take longer than 3 seconds. And only 3 seconds is very useful. The 25% energy is very nice. This is, however, the greatest strength that Resurrection Signet has is this is a common skill. It does not care what profession you are. You can use this to resurrect somebody. That said, I'm going to prefer most of the time in PvE to bring, say, Resurrection Chant or Signet of Return, even on a secondary Paragon. Returns with a decent amount if it's only one person down. I talked about that in the Paragon video last time, so you can check that out if you want to. Leadership. We Shall Return is something that I will also prefer. There are Flesh of My Flesh. Death Pact Signet is kind of a variant on this. That is a Signet that is, in fact, quite similar. Actually, I think this character probably has it. It's in Restoration Magic, if I remember correctly. No, I have Flesh of My Flesh, not Death Pact Signet. So Flesh of My Flesh is a Resurrect. Death Pact Signet is an alternate choice to it. Basically, that morale boost restriction is really, really nasty. So if you absolutely want to make sure you have a Resurrect, and both your primary and secondary profession are important, and neither of them have access to a Resurrection skill, then and only then would I consider Resurrection Signet in PvE. I appreciate that this skill exists, that it allows anyone to be able to resurrect, but the recharge only on a morale boost clause is extremely tight and not one that I like to be subject to. So I'm going to give this one a 2 because I think it's very situational in terms of the number of cases in which I want to make use of this. I think it's very situational for when I'd want to identify a time. And again, I'm going to want Sunspear Rebirth Signet over this as a player if I have the free PvE slots. This becomes less interesting. I could see trying to run it on heroes and stuff like that. It is a useful mid-combat resurrect, but I do feel like the skill is much more appealing in PvP than it is in PvE. Just because of the recharge clause. And if I'm being quite blunt, I feel like the recharge clause exists because of PvP. This is a skill that I would have liked to have seen gotten a split, to have a PvP only version that's this, and have a PvE version that has like 120, 360, I don't know, some somewhat lengthy, like 5-minute recharge or something, 300 seconds, 5-minute recharge, where it's like, yeah, you can't really spam this. It's like once per every couple of fights sort of thing, but it does recharge eventually on its own. I would have liked to have seen that direction in PvE, just because I don't think that would be too strong. But for PvP, this is a much higher skill. This is more like a 5 for PvP, because having this sort of resurrect is significantly more powerful in that format. So that brings us to the last PvE-only skill, which is Signet of Capture. Signet of Capture was not originally PvE-only, by the way. It wasn't until the PvE-only concept was introduced, which was much later with... Was it Eye of the North or Nightfall when that was first... I think it was Nightfall when that was first introduced. But Signet of Capture originally wasn't. But this is only useful in PvE. So it is 2-second activation, 2-second recharge. It is a Signet. Choose one skill from a nearby dead boss of your profession, either of your professions. Signet of Capture is permanently replaced by that skill. And if that skill was an elite skill, you gain 250 experience points for every level you have earned. So I would, at level 20, get 5,000 experience. So I'm not rating this skill. This skill is non-rateable. This is the only way of getting elite skills in PvE. That's not true. You can also use elite skill tomes. But this is originally the only way of getting them. Skill tomes were introduced later. So Signet of Capture, I think, is really interesting to talk about from a mechanical standpoint. Because the way that this skill works is it lets you, from a design standpoint, it sets it up so that way to get elites, what you're usually doing is you're going and hunting down enemies. You're hunting down specific bosses to be able to get their elite skill. And I think that's really cool. You can get non-elite skills as well, although that tends to not be the best way of getting them. It's usually better to just get them through skill trainers and things like that. But you can also purchase for your character an unlimited number of Signet of Captures. You can have multiple Signet of Captures. I only have one here because I don't really need multiples, but you can, if you want to, have like 1,000 Signet of Captures probably. I don't think it'll quite be able to go through that many. It would be an interesting challenge run, by the way, to only allow yourself to get skills through skill quests and capturing them. Or even, I don't think it would be possible to do it only capturing them, but that would be a really interesting challenge run on a fresh character. But Signet of Capture is a really cool design concept in that it gives you this sort of bounty system where you're specifically looking for enemies to go capture them. And I really love that design. So I think that's really, really cool. So that's kind of what I want to talk about, Signet of Capture. Now, I wanted to go test a few specific things. So let's go ahead and kind of call the review portion to a close and go look at a few other things. So I'm going to, I think I can do this in the Great Temple of Balthazar, actually. So that's going to be the easiest place to do some of this. I could show you this Signet of Capture interface at some point here. This is taking a weirdly long time to load. Here we are. I don't need Gwen in my party. Anyway, so let's go test out a couple of things here. I'd have to think of a good boss to go visit. Oh, there's okay, I know a boss that I can go visit pretty quickly. Okay, so first of all, I want to test. Let's actually walk next to this. That way I can test all of these. Okay, and with all of these up, let's send this out. Yep, Ebon Vanguard Assassin Support triggers these guys. So you saw the 5 energy and stuff from that one, and the 5 health from that one. I think it triggered this one. So we'd have to kind of look back at the footage for that. So the Raven Blessing, if I use that, you can see it gives me some skills. So I get Raven's Talons, which target touch foe takes some piercing damage and bleeding and crippled for a little bit. And so you can just spam this. Raven's Swoop, which strike target foe and all adjacent foes for 92 damage on a 4-second recharge, which is very quick. Raven Shriek removes blindness from all allies with an earshot and causes blindness to all nearby enemies for 9 seconds. So that's pretty useful, especially if you're chaining it among several allies. This just ends the totem, or this just ends the blessing and returns you to human form, or gives you your normal skills. This, by the way, just prevents knockdown. So basically what you're doing is you're spamming these 2 skills right here as often as you can, generally speaking. This one as much as you can, in particular because it's the strongest. And then you can use this to end it early if you want to. Or it will just end naturally after a little bit. And then be on a 60-second recharge, so you can only have it up half the time. I wanted to test Explosive Growth again. So if I use this... Yeah, it took the initial 20 damage. So Ebon Vanguard Assassin Support works really well with these skills. So that's cool to note. Let's go ahead and go back into Great Temple of Balthazar. Check out the other 2 blessings. It'll take a moment to kind of go through both of those. But you can see, like, that's what using one of the blessings looks like, as it takes your skill bar, says, okay, well, here's a few specific skills that I'm giving you access to. Unfortunately, that means, like, they basically had to nerf these a lot because they were extraordinarily powerful. So let's see. This one, for 13 seconds, you move 30% faster and break through wooden barricades. I don't know how often wooden barricades comes up, but this is 100% uptime, increased movement speed skill. That feels like it's a holdover from the PvE mission that it was from. Urson Strike deals 68 damage. and 68 slashing damage to target touched foe. So you'll notice against this suit of 80 armor, one of those is 48 and the other 68. That's because the slashing damage is reduced by the 80 armor. This one, touch target foe and deal 120 physical damage to all adjacent enemies. Struck foes are also knocked down for 20 seconds. And then for 4 seconds, all enemies within earshot are weakened and all allies gain plus 13 damage per attack. I feel like that one was nerfed as well. But you get the picture of like, okay, you get a skill bar of 4 skills, a bunch of specific stats, and then the ability to revert the thing. And some of the skills are kind of strong. I don't know. It's just, it feels very uninteresting. It feels very spammy. It feels very bland to me. And finally we have Wolfen Blessing, which is the last of these. So Wolfen Blessing, again, when I apply it, you'll notice that it drops Windborne speed off of me. So Wolfen Agility is a quarter second cast time, 30-second recharge enchantment spell. For 18 seconds, your Wolfen skills recharge 66% faster, so you definitely want to apply this as often as you can. Bloodlust, for 6 seconds, you and all nearby allies attack 33% faster. That has 100% uptime with Wolfen Agility, otherwise it does not. You can see that it does a lot to increase my attack speed. But this also, you'll notice, drops all of my attributes to 0, which means that my attack skills, my attacking is just going to be awful because I don't have any attribute points in my weapon, so it's just going to deal mediocre damage. There's also Wolfen Claw, which deals 56 damage and target touched foe suffers from a deep wound, which is quite strong. And then this Wolfen Pounce stance that makes you run 29% faster for 18 seconds, and then you deal 92 damage to adjacent targets while the skill is active. Dealing damage causes the skill to end. So I guess the way that one works is sort of while it's going, the skill would pulse damage, but the first time it does damage, it ends. But you'll notice one of the things there is like this one could play a decent role in like supporting frontline stuff, but making myself attack faster or my allies attack faster if they're just attacking with normal weapons is just going to be bad because my attributes being set to 0 means that whatever weapon I wield, it doesn't matter what it is going to deal really poor damage. Your best choice there is to use a candy cane weapon that is like the highest damage you can get without having specific attribute requirements. I don't think this character has any candy weapons. I have them on other characters. I do have a Chor's Axe, which is fun. I guess vampiric weapons can kind of work okay with it. Let's move this to the normal way that I have it. Okay, so this is recharged, so we can look at this again. So Wolfen Pounce, if I stand here, you see it pulses damage and then ends. And then I can just spam this for deep wounds and this to buff my allies, but it's no good for me. So all of these just kind of feel a little bit weak because this is one of those things where it's really hard to balance. If it's too good, then there's no reason to do normal stuff because it just makes you into this, right? It sets your armor, it sets your skills, it sets your health. None of your personalization matters. You're just this, right? So if it's good, then that's all anybody ever does. So it has to be kind of mediocre or a little bit awkward, and so that's what they ended up settling with, unfortunately. Okay, so let's go ahead and see about showing Signet of Capture. So I need to be /monk for where I'm going. I think I have this location on this character. Okay, we are here in the Jade Sea. We're going to head into the archipelago. I remembered a boss that's relatively easy to get to, and I've set up a team composition to kind of go show off what Signet of Capture is like. So I'm going to go after a ritualist boss that I remembered existed, but I thought I would show off a couple of skills. Now, first of all, this is a PvE-only skill. You can only have up to 3 Signets of Capture in your bar, and for each Signet of Capture, you can't have another PvE-only skill. So let's go ahead and start by summoning a Ruby Djinn. So when I do that, you'll see here's our Ruby Djinn. It's level 19, and we're going to go fight some Kappas. Let's throw this on the Naga Ritualist. Naga Ritualists, that damage it just took is damage it kind of did to itself in some regards. I think I failed to make sure I have adequate deep wound infliction, but oh well, it'll be okay. So we're just going to kind of make our way through the area here. So I will go ahead and come back when we get to the boss. Okay, up here we have Sin Coiled Grasps. That's what a boss looks like. They have that sort of golden glow. Now, my Ruby Jin has ended, and I got interrupted trying to cast it, so I'm not going to be able to get it back. But if I select the boss and I throw Pain Inverter on it, you can see it triggering that. If it uses an Area of Effect skill, it will really trigger it and deal quite a lot of damage to itself, which is a common and popular reason why it is so useful, because bosses wrecking themselves off of having multiple triggers of Pain Inverter by using powerful AoE skills, well, that's a way of taking a little bit of the sting out of what they did anyway. So let's go ahead and throw that on him again. And the boss, like, bosses are super enemies. They're not, like, ridiculous. So I just want to take out this last Naga Ritualist. Shouldn't take long. It's just normal enemy. You can see Ray of Judgment glowing there. So I use Signet of Capture. It activates, and I get this interface. I can select any of these skills, and it will give me capture. Now, I cannot capture skills I already have. So Ancestor's Rage, Draw Spear, I cannot get them. I could get Destruction, Nightmare Weapon, or I could get Grasping with Kurong, which is an elite skill. This is the primary way of getting elite skills, and originally the only way. Like I mentioned, there is something called an elite skill tome. I have a normal version of a skill tome right here. It's an elementalist tome. It'll give me any non-elite elementalist skill that's unlocked on my account and allow me to be able to get it on this character. There are elite versions that allow you to get any elite skill. So I can come here and I can say, okay, I want Grasping was Kurong, and I can capture it. And now this skill permanently gets changed into Grasping was Kurong. Basically, the Signet of Capture is deleted off of my list of skills, and in this case, it's going to be Channeling Magic. Grasping was Kurong is permanently added to this character's skills. Now, I could have picked any skill, and it would have done that conversion regardless, but this is, to me, a really cool way of doing this sort of thing, of adding a way of skill acquisition that gets players out into the world, gets them exploring, gets them hunting down specific monsters. It makes finding specific skills really exciting, and all that sort of thing. I think that's really, really cool. So I really like that system, and I think it is a great system, and that's what Signet of Capture is all about. But that kind of wraps things up for this episode. There's not going to be, like, I've reviewed all the skills, so that's done. But next week, what I think I'm going to do at this time is I'm just going to do kind of a conclusion. I'm going to do some final thoughts on stuff that I've learned from this, stuff that's worth considering, stuff thinking about, some lessons learned from this enormous project. So until then, everyone, take care. Goodbye.